Hello everyone. Today we are going to dive into 7 real-life cases, each of which has garnered public and media attention. While investigating each of these 7 cases, the detectives faced some challenges. However, evidence, witness testimony, and in some cases, surveillance footage eventually made it possible to get to the truth. In this video, we take a look at the events that took place in Jacksonville, Florida. Kim Dorsey was found dead in her home. While examining the scene, detectives realized that she had tried to escape through her bedroom window, but she was unsuccessful. Detectives had to work hard to solve this case, which had several suspects. In 2012, Kim Dorsey was 38 years old. She graduated from the University of North Florida with a degree in civil engineering. She was a certified general contractor and owner of her own construction company, as well as director of training for the Quality Assurance Department of Inspection Depot. She lived in a beautiful home with her husband, Derek Dorsey. Derek had been a firefighter for 20 years and was well respected in his community. Kim seemed like a wonderful person, and everyone thought she had the perfect marriage. However, no one knows what goes on in the perfect couple's home when the front door closes. On October 28, 2012, Derek came home from work and discovered Kim's motionless body. He immediately called 911. He informed the operator that he was giving Kim CPR but thought she was dead. When the operator asked Derek what happened to Kim, he said she may have self-harmed. An ambulance and police arrived on the scene. Kim was pronounced dead at the scene. Derek told the 911 operator that Kim may have self-harmed. However, detectives examining the scene immediately realized they were dealing with foul play. When Derek found his wife, he covered her body with a blanket, and then, when the medical examiner arrived on the scene, they removed the blanket and saw the brutality of what had happened to Kim. Derek told detectives he had gone to work the previous morning. Firefighters work around the clock. When he got home Sunday morning, shortly after 8 o'clock, he went into the bedroom expecting to catch Kim in bed. They had thick curtains, so it was very dark in there. He saw Kim lying on the floor at the foot of the bed. He called 911, but by this time, Kim was already dead. During the autopsy, experts determined that Kim Dorsey had died approximately 24 hours before Derek called 911. While examining the crime scene, police found a lot of evidence. Kim's ankles and wrists were bound with a plastic tie. There was a broken pool stick on the floor. There was a gun on the floor next to it. There was also a knife on the floor, all in close proximity to Kim's body. There were bullet marks in the wall and in the bedroom doorway. It looked like someone had been in the bedroom and fired from there. There were a lot of things that needed to be explained. Investigators figured it out by looking around the rest of the house. Someone was going through the kitchen, opening drawers, dumping out the contents. Definitely someone was looking for something. The kitchen sink had 3 or 4 remote controls and a keypad that is part of a surround sound system, which was very odd. There was no damage on the front door to indicate that it had been broken into in any way. But detectives did notice something that was out of place. There was a ceramic dog statue by the front door, and it was knocked over. They quickly come to their first conclusion. The very idea that some stranger could have broken into the house, tied Kim up with plastic ties, stabbed her, and beat her with a pool stick seemed unlikely. Kim Dorsey probably knew who attacked her, or the intruder knew how to get into the house. It was no surprise that Derek became the first suspect and was taken to the police station for questioning. The detective asked Derek to elaborate on the previous weekend, his work, and his relationship with his wife. He said that on Friday, Kim left the house for a couple of hours to go shopping. In the evening, they stayed home and watched a movie. On Saturday morning, Derek got up early and left for work at his usual time, around 7 a.m. He finished his shift on Sunday at 8 in the morning. So when he was gone for those 24 hours, Kim was home alone. On Saturday, he tried to call her several times on her cell phone. Derek worked at a fire station that was located in the very north of the county. Cell coverage there wasn't always up to par, and the call didn't go through. So far, everything Derek had told them fit together, with one exception. He is a seasoned professional with years of experience. However, during the 911 call, he told the operator that Kim probably self-harmed. How could he not see that this was in fact a crime? Was he in on it? Talking about his relationship with Kim, Derek said they essentially had a free relationship. They allowed each other to engage in relationships with other partners. But Derek added that Kim stopped doing it because her mother died 3 or 4 years ago and she was taking the loss hard. Kim sought professional medical help. She took medication, which caused her to put on a little weight and perhaps no longer feel as attractive as she used to. Since Kim had stopped leading a freewheeling lifestyle, detectives needed to find out if Derek had done the same. Often marital infidelity is the cause of someone's death. Derek admitted that he was currently in a relationship with another woman. Detectives wanted to find out if Derek wanted to end his marriage to Kim. Would he have received any financial benefit from her death? Derek was asked if his wife had a life insurance policy, but Kim's life was not insured. The detectives thought about time frames, such as how long it would take Derek to drive back and forth from the fire station to his home. The distance between the two locations is 15 miles, and the round trip would take almost an hour. The fire station where he worked was small. Detectives interviewed all the firefighters and concluded that Derek had an airtight alibi. The investigators then decided to look at another option. They knew that Derek had a girlfriend that he was talking about. Maybe this woman wanted Kim out of the picture. In the case of a love triangle, someone might feel they were treated unfairly. Maybe Derek promised his girlfriend that he would divorce Kim, but didn't fulfill that promise. Detectives questioned Derek's girlfriend, and she had a solid alibi, so she was quickly ruled out as a suspect. Investigators returned to the crime scene to take another look at everything. In certain circumstances, when it is unclear what happened and who is involved, specialists such as blood spatter analysts may be involved in the investigation. They can provide more information about exactly what happened. It was important to understand the sequence of events, where the fight started and where it ended. Experts determined that the first place Kim was injured was near the bedside table. There was a lot of blood on the left side of the bed. She was seriously injured and remained there for a significant period of time. The evidence indicated that Kim then regained consciousness and began to fight back. She was able to get to where she kept her gun. It was a 5-shot revolver. She fired all 5 shots, shooting at someone who may have been standing in the doorway. Despite firing 5 shots, Kim never once hit her attacker. The direction of flight of the bullets, as you can see, is from bottom to top, which means that Kim was sitting or lying on the bedroom floor when she fired the shots. As I said, she fired 5 shots but missed. When the perpetrator realized she was out of ammunition, he returned to the room with a pool stick and continued to hit her until the stick broke. It would take a lot of force to break a pool stick, and it was broken against Kim's body. To top it off, the perpetrator stabbed her in the neck. The detailed analysis provided new insights into the crime and the potential perpetrator. The most telling murder weapon was a pool stick that was stored on the second floor. Detectives were able to discover that Kim had plastic ties on her wrists and ankles, and they too were stored in an upstairs office. And the knife was from a set that was in the kitchen. All of this indicated that whoever committed this crime was familiar with the house. He knew Kim well enough to get into her home and knew what was in the house and where it was. In the opinion of investigators, this indicated that someone close to the family committed the crime. During the autopsy, injuries were found on Kim's body, indicating that she had contact with a man before she died, and that contact was against her will. I'm sure you know what I mean. So the police had a DNA sample of the perpetrator. Based on what Derek Dorsey told them, there could have been other men in the house while he was at work. That widened the pool of potential suspects, and the police had to test all of them. Detectives asked Derek for possible names of men who had been in the house. Derek, in addition to being a firefighter, worked as a general contractor at a construction site. Some of the people Derek used in his contracting business lived in his home at one time. Derek reported that there was one guy, Lance Kirkpatrick, who used to work with him, and they became friends. Lance was having problems, and Derek let him live in his house for a few months. However, when Lance started using illegal substances, Derek asked him to leave. According to Derek, the weekend the crime occurred, Lance was on a boat in the Atlantic Ocean. The second person Derek talked about was a guy named Joshua Veal. Derek befriended Joshua, gave him some work, and tried to help him. Derek and Kim let Joshua live in their house, but they argued, and eventually Joshua moved out. But Derek said he still hired Joshua for odd jobs and was supposed to meet him the morning he discovered Kim's body. On Sunday morning, when he finished work, Derek was going to pick up Joshua Veal. They had arranged to meet at a convenience store, but Joshua never showed up. Why wouldn't he show up for this meeting if he wanted to make money? So Joshua became a suspect. Police discovered that Joshua Veal had a criminal history, mostly for offenses involving illegal substances. He was detained and taken to an interview room. The detective asked Joshua to describe how he had spent the weekend. He claimed that he had been partying at his home all weekend, including the time the detectives believed the crime occurred. The detective then asked if he had a romantic relationship with Kim Dorsey. He answered no, but hinted that he wouldn't mind a relationship because he found Kim to be a very attractive woman. Toward the end, the detective informed Joshua that Kim was dead. His reaction came as a surprise to the detectives. He began to cry. But were his emotions genuine, or was he faking it? They took a DNA sample from him and let him go. Forensics showed that the DNA found on Kim Dorsey's body did not belong to Joshua. That's one less suspect for the police. Derek provided the police with additional names of people familiar with his home. All of them provided DNA for testing and were eventually ruled out. Investigators then decided to once again return to the crime scene, but this time to walk through the house with Derek. When they first inspected the kitchen, they found 4 remote controls in the sink that are part of the surround sound system, which was very strange. Someone had flooded the remotes with water, probably to flush out the DNA. Derek was able to turn on the TV, and it immediately started an adult movie. Derek claimed it wasn't his movie. Could that mean the perpetrator was watching TV? Derek remembered that there had been another man in the house recently. They were having problems with the remote control and with their television system. On Friday afternoon, an employee of the company that sold them the system came by and made some adjustments to the surround sound. This man was in the house about 12 hours before Kim died. What if he decided to come back while Derek was at work? Detectives quickly tracked this man down and began questioning him. They noticed he had cuts on his hands. He said he'd hurt himself on the job and that it was nothing unusual. He denied any involvement in what happened to Kim Dorsey and agreed to provide his DNA. It did not match the DNA found on Kim's body. Events began to unfold rapidly when an officer discovered a routine police report of temporary, unauthorized use of a vehicle. That's a pretty fancy way of stating that the car was stolen, but you yourself allowed the person to take it. The theft occurred just 17 hours before Kim's death. The girl who reported the car stolen filed a police report. The man she allowed to use the car, who never returned it, was named Lance Kirkpatrick. Lance Kirkpatrick's name came up early in the investigation, when Derek Dorsey was remembering who had been in his house. But Derek believed that Lance was on a boat in the ocean at the time of the crime. The girl who reported the car stolen told detectives that she, Lance, and others were at a party Friday night. Lance agreed to go to the store to get a drink, and she allowed him to take her vehicle. That's when Lance Kirkpatrick left and never returned. Detectives decided to find out if the car ever approached Kim Dorsey's home. When police arrived on the scene, their duties included interviewing neighbors. Initially, one of the patrol officers spoke with Dorsey's neighbor, who said he had seen a small blue SUV there that day. It matched the description of the car Kirkpatrick had stolen. A few days later, police received information about the SUV. They found surveillance video that confirmed that on the day of Kim's death, the blue SUV was outside her home at 6:30 a.m. Once police saw this surveillance video, Lance Kirkpatrick became the #1 suspect. To find him, They reached out to the woman he stole the car from. She said she didn't know where Lance was, but she knew where to find a friend of his named Brian Kiefer. Brian was taken to the police station where he was asked to give a statement about Lance Kirkpatrick. Investigators found out that Brian was at the same party when the SUV disappeared. Brian said he had been driving around in a cab all night trying to find out where Lance was, because he was one of the people who let Lance use the car. He wasn't able to find him until the next day. According to Brian, Lance looked disheveled, and he noticed that he had an injury on one of his arms. What Brian further revealed was completely unexpected. Lance told him that he had killed a man and that he was going to jail. He said it was a beating. There are several reasons why people confess to a crime. First of all, because of guilt. They can't bear it, they can't hide it, they can't keep it to themselves. Reason number 2 can be caused by alcohol or illegal substances, when a person is not in control of themselves and starts blabbing. Lance shared details with Brian that only a criminal would know. For example, he said that he attacked Kim and used a pool stick. Lance also said that he was shot 5 times. He waited for the 6th shot, but it never came because it was a 5-shot revolver. There were 2 possibilities in this case. The perpetrator was either Lance Kirkpatrick or Brian Kiefer, because he knew the details of the crime. Brian told detectives that Lance was hiding in the attic of his house. Lance Kirkpatrick was arrested. He was calm during the interview. He was asked about his relationship with Derek Dorsey and when he had last been to his house. Lance replied that he had been there a week or a week and a half ago. Lance had been in contact with Derek long enough, worked with him a lot. He knew Derek's schedule and that he wouldn't be home for 24 hours. He knew Kim would be home alone. Detectives asked Lance about her relationship with Kim Dorsey. He said there were no problems in their relationship, but that was the end of the interview because Lance demanded an attorney and refused to answer questions. Since Kirkpatrick refused to cooperate, investigators had to find another way to prove he was at Kim's house. DNA testing could have answered many questions. Investigators took a DNA sample from Lance's father and compared it to the DNA found on Kim's body. The similarities were stunning. Not only did it confirm Kirkpatrick as the killer, but it also cleared another suspect, Brian Kiefer. Detectives believe Kirkpatrick's movements in the hours before the murder suggest he had some kind of sinister plan. Lance, as you know, left that Friday night in someone else's car and came back. He knew how to get to Kim's house. He knew Derek's schedule and that he wouldn't be home for 24 hours. He knew Kim was home alone. He knew that the spare key was kept under the dog statue. He took that key and entered the house. That's probably when Kim Dorsey heard him. However, the details of exactly what happened next are still a mystery. Despite overwhelming evidence, Lance Kirkpatrick initially pleaded not guilty. However, in a trial held nearly 2 years after Kim's death, Kirkpatrick admitted responsibility for her death, but claimed he did not mean to kill her. Kirkpatrick said he was good friends with the Dorseys and that Kim Dorsey was training him. He said he and Kim Dorsey went to the gym 3 to 4 times a week and would sometimes drink and flirt afterward, which led to intimate contact a few times. It wasn't anything constant, it was random, it wasn't planned, Kirkpatrick said of his intimate encounters with Kim Dorsey. Lance's version was that they had consensual intimate contact on the day of Kim's death. He admitted that the DVD of the adult movie belonged to him. He claimed that after they finished, Kim Dorsey became angry at him for helping her husband meet other women, and this made Kim Dorsey furious. In her rage, she grabbed a gun and started shooting him. According to him, everything that happened next was due to the fact that he was basically trying to fight back in self-defense. He said he ran and hid in the kitchen where he had left the pool stick earlier. He said he ran to Kim and swung the pool stick wildly, trying to take the gun from her. He said he knocked her out and then put the gun in his back pocket and tied her up with plastic ties. He said he later changed his mind about tying her up because he thought it would look bad when the police arrived because of the shooting. He said he found a knife to cut the plastic ties, but at some point, Kim grabbed the knife and they started struggling. According to him, he accidentally stabbed her. The police never arrived, and he himself was afraid to call 911 and just ran away. "I was frantic. I didn't know what to do. I was scared. I just sat and was waiting for the police," Kirkpatrick said. During cross-examination, the prosecutor attempted to catch Kirkpatrick in lies and paint inconsistencies in his testimony for the jury. But lastly, the state wanted to hear Kirkpatrick tell the jury what punishment he thinks he deserves. "I'm guilty," Kirkpatrick said. "I don't know what I want right now." In May 2015, Lance Kirkpatrick was sentenced to 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole. He could have been sentenced to death, but the jury recommended life imprisonment. His mother begged the jury not to sentence him to death. Derek Dorsey gave a victim impact statement after the sentencing. Wiping away tears, Derek said Kim Dorsey was so much more than a firefighter's wife. He said she was smart, strong, and worked hard for all her accomplishments, including a civil engineering degree from the University of North Florida and starting her own business. In an interview, Derek said he was disappointed with the sentence and that he had wanted the death penalty imposed. The events described in this video took place in the American state of South Carolina. Jessica Carpenter lived with her parents and 2 older sisters in the city of Aiken. Aiken is not a large city, the population of which is about 30,000 people. Therefore, the news of what happened to Jessica Carpenter spread very quickly through the city and attracted the attention of the media. On August 4, 2000, Judy, Jessica's mother, came home and found her daughter's body lying on the floor. She was 17 years old. More than 5 years passed before the perpetrator was held accountable. Jessica was a senior at Aiken High School where she played in the school band. During the summers, she worked part-time as a hostess at a local restaurant called Red Lobster. Vacations were coming to an end, and she was excited to begin her final year of high school. That day, August 4, 2000, Jessica and her mother Judy had lunch together, after which Judy left for work, and Jessica was left home alone. That was the last time Judy saw her daughter alive. Judy got home at about 5:30 p.m. Opening the door, she took a few steps before she saw something no mother should ever see. Her daughter was lying naked on the floor and showing no signs of life. Terrified, Judy ran out to her car and called 911. When she explained the situation, the operator asked Judy to go back into the house and check to see if Jessica was breathing. Judy was gripped with fear, but nevertheless, she went back into the house. She did everything the operator told her to do. After a brief pause, Judy informed the operator that Jessica was not breathing. She was cold. Medics and police immediately rushed to the scene. Jessica was pronounced dead at the scene. Police first inspected the house to make sure the perpetrator was not hiding somewhere inside. A telephone wire was wrapped around Jessica's neck, and there was also a stab wound on her neck. Jessica was not wearing any clothes, and this fact made it obvious what motivated the crime. Judging from the atmosphere in the house, Jessica fought back. Struggles occurred in her bedroom, kitchen, and living room. Crime scene investigators took DNA samples from Jessica's body and partially lifted fingerprints. There was little physical evidence. A partial fingerprint was found, and that was a little frustrating for investigators. The only significant evidence the police found was unknown male DNA. Aside from the DNA, there was virtually nothing in the case to hold on to. Before leaving the scene, detectives noticed another important detail. There were no signs of forced entry. Jessica was home alone, and in cases like this, she always locked her doors. It was obvious that she either knew the perpetrator or felt safe enough to let this person into the house. People were shocked that something like this happened in their neighborhood because it had never happened before. There was not a lot of crime in the neighborhood. During the forensic examination, it was determined that Jessica died from internal bleeding and lack of oxygen. The Carpenter family home, once filled with laughter and life, was now shrouded in an impenetrable shadow of mourning. The living room, the scene of quiet family evenings and raucous birthday parties, had become the scene of a terrible crime. Jessica's parents, Charles and Judy, seemed lost in time. Their world was shattered. The thought that they had failed to protect their daughter kept them at peace. Jessica's sisters were devastated by what had happened, but it was a time when the family rallied together. The Carpenters were determined and believed the police would find the person responsible for Jessica's death. Aiken is a small city, so news of what happened to Jessica Carpenter spread very quickly. Every local television station and every newspaper covered the story. There are times when law enforcement needs the media. To help solve crimes, they need the public to know about it. And while investigators shared some information about the crime with the press, key details were kept secret. The information that Jessica was shot in the neck, that she was strangled with a telephone wire, and that she was found naked was kept secret. On August 25, 2000, 3 weeks after Jessica's death, police received the first information and, using local news reports, disseminated it. Investigators got hold of surveillance footage from a convenience store located just a few blocks from the house where Jessica lived. Their attention was drawn to the young man in the upper right corner of your screen, and detectives believed he might know something about Jessica Carpenter's death. The police wanted to identify him and question him as part of an ongoing investigation. Every lead, no matter how insignificant it may seem, was scrutinized very carefully. Based on surveillance video, the Aiken police published a sketch that was shown on television in hopes that someone would recognize the man. The detectives investigating Jessica Carpenter held the sketch of the suspect in their hands as if it were the key that could unlock the doors of truth. They went to Aiken High School, where Jessica attended, and where everyone knew her. They made their way to the principal's office to seek support from the administration. The principal looked at the sketch, but did not recognize the person depicted in it. After talking to the principal, the detectives began interviewing Jessica's classmates. Every conversation, every tiny remark could be a clue to the crime. There were some students who were in special interest groups with Jessica. Members of the school orchestra, for example. Detectives also talked to teachers who knew Jessica. However, after spending several hours at the school, they came away with nothing. No one knew who was depicted in this sketch. After a few days, the police managed to identify the man, but as it turned out, he had nothing to do with what happened to Jessica. He was just an out-of-city student who sold magazines. Since the police had little information, they reached out to Jessica's closest people. Alice Bryant was one of her best friends at Aiken High School. She met Jessica in 6th grade. She and Jessica played in the music orchestra. They were both looking forward to senior year, preparing for college and growing up. The investigators asked Alice to tell them if there were people around Jessica who wanted to harm her. Maybe she had a fight with someone at school. Maybe she rejected one of the boys and he couldn't deal with it. But Alice claimed that Jessica didn't have any enemies. She got along well with everyone. So it was another dead end in the investigation. With Jessica's friends unable to provide any leads, the police turned to the only hard evidence found at the crime scene, the DNA of an unknown male. A database check revealed no matches. Given that Jessica probably let the perpetrator into the house herself and that she may have known and trusted the man, detectives decided to check Jessica's inner circle. They took DNA samples from her family, friends, and neighbors. They went to Judy's workplace and interviewed all the men, including her supervisor. To rule out as many potential suspects as possible, the Aiken police asked the local media to spread the word. They asked the men to come forward and voluntarily submit a DNA sample. About 300 DNA samples were tested. Of course, the perpetrator was not stupid enough to help the police. Among the samples tested, there was no DNA that matched the DNA found on Jessica's body. 2 months after Jessica Carpenter's death, another similar crime occurred, but this time in Georgia. This time, the victim was 18 years old. By some miracle, Chrysalie Barton survived and told what happened to her. Chrysalie said that she met a man in the parking lot of a restaurant. He offered to model for her. She asked to see his identification, but the man refused to show it. When the man asked Chrissie if he could walk her home, she reluctantly agreed, which she soon regretted. He attacked her in her home, ripped off her clothes, and you can of course understand what happened after that. The man then began to strangle her and stabbed her 3 times. He thought she was dead, but Chrissie managed to survive. She crawled to the phone and called 911. She later gave the police a description of the man. It seemed obvious that the same man who had attacked Chrissie Barton had also attacked Jessica Carpenter. There were too many similarities between the 2 crimes. As soon as the sketch hit the news, the police station received calls from women who claimed to have seen the man in the photo. One call came from Jessica Carpenter's former Red Lobster colleague who recognized the man in the sketch. She reported that she had worked with Jessica the week before she was murdered, and as they were chatting on the street, the man approached them. He stopped and asked for directions to somewhere. They tried to explain to him where he had to go, and then he asked if either of them could go with him and show him the exact way. They both refused. From their shirts, the man realized where they worked. A week after this conversation, Jessica was murdered, leading investigators to wonder if it was a mere coincidence or if something more was lurking afterward. The sketch of the perpetrator was shown on every newscast, and thanks largely to this, 3 days later, the police had a name. His name was Reynaldo Rivera. He was put on the wanted list. The police wanted to find him as soon as possible because he could hurt someone else. His car was found in a motel parking lot, and several officers drove there to arrest him. When they burst into the room where Rivera was staying, the news was just coming on the television, and it was once again showing a sketch of the suspect. By this time, Rivera was lying unconscious on the floor. To escape justice, he thought of nothing better than to take a blade and harm himself. But the police arrived in time, and he survived. Now detectives had to figure out who Reynaldo Rivera was and if he was involved in what happened to Jessica Carpenter. Born in Madrid, Spain, in the family of a doctor, Rivera and his family moved to Puerto Rico when he was 7 years old. At age 19, he joined the United States Navy, serving in Orlando, Florida, and San Diego, California. As an adult, between December 1986 and March 1991, Rivera worked for the Joint Chiefs of Staff in Washington, D.C., attending the University of South Carolina, where he earned a degree in office administration. He previously resided in Graniteville, Columbia, and Fayetteville, North Carolina, before settling in North Augusta. On Valentine's Day in 1993, he married Tammy Lisa Bonnett and had 2 children. By 1998, Rivera acquired a job as a tire inspector for the Firestone Tire and Rubber Company in Aiken. No one suspected that he led a second secret life. Aiken police and Jessica's family were convinced they had found the person responsible for her death. But when investigators searched the motel room where Rivera was staying, they got a surprise. He left a note saying he had nothing to do with Jessica Carpenter's death. Reynaldo Rivera was arrested for assaulting Chrissie Barton. Police thought he might also be connected to the Jessica Carpenter case. They thought that would be the end of it, that the case would be closed. But instead of confessing to Jessica's murder, Rivera stuns police by confessing to another series of unsolved crimes. On July 17, 1999, 17-year-old Melissa Faye Dingus from Graniteville, South Carolina, vanished without a trace. In the ensuing searches, deputies from the Aiken County Sheriff's Office reported that a girl matching Dingus's description was seen on 2 occasions, accompanied by an older white male with dark hair. She entered a tan, older model vehicle in the first instance and, in the second, a bright red 4-door one. On October 13, 2000, her skeletal remains were found in the woods off the I-20 near Harlem, Georgia, 7 miles west of the Savannah River, after Rivera gave police directions to the burial site. On December 4th, 17-year-old Tiffany Sharice Wilson from Jackson went missing while she and her 2-month-old daughter Caitlin were visiting a Winn-Dixie grocery store in North Augusta. Her car was found in the parking lot, with witnesses seeing her enter a mid-1980s white 4-door Ford, which had stopped briefly and sped off quickly. 3 days later, Caitlin was found abandoned in her car in front of a Georgia Welcome Center across the state border. On December 30th, 2 hunters discovered the body of a young female in a heavily wooded area near Graniteville. The decedent was later positively identified as Wilson via her fingerprints. On June 19, 2000, 18-year-old Tabitha Lee Bosdell of Augusta, Georgia, disappeared in similar circumstances to the previous victims. According to her family members, they dropped her off at a Huddle house where she was going to apply for a second part-time job before going to her main job as a telemarketer. Her remains were found and identified, after which Rivera was charged. On September 5, 2000, Marnie Marie Glista was assaulted in her home. She was 21 years old. She suffered serious injuries but survived. She was taken to a local hospital where she died of her injuries 5 days later. She became Ronaldo Rivera's fourth known victim. On October 10, 2000, Rivera attacked Cresely Barton, who managed to survive, and thanks to whom police had a sketch. All of Rivera's victims were around the same age, and all of his crimes followed the same pattern. All ended with strangulation and stab wounds to the neck. Rivera, 37, was placed in solitary confinement, where he was under constant medical supervision to ensure he could not harm himself. Although Rivera confessed to 5 other crimes, he denied any involvement in what happened to Jessica Carpenter. Police obtained Rivera's DNA and rushed the sample to a lab. For Jessica's family, waiting for the results was unbearable. But just when the Aiken Police Department thought they had caught the culprit, a new twist came to the case. Police informant Craig Gant told authorities that the man, Tony Baldwin, had confessed to him to the murder of Jessica Carpenter. Tony Baldwin was already in the Aiken County Jail on another murder charge. Now DNA samples have been taken from him to see if he was involved in Jessica's death. Her family, her friends, and the police could only wait. By January 2001, the DNA results of both men were in, and the entire community held its breath. In a shocking turn of events for Jessica Carpenter's family, not 1 but 2 suspects in her murder were cleared of charges. Rivera's DNA and Tony Baldwin's DNA did not match the DNA found in the house and on Jessica's body. This was a major disappointment to both the family and investigators. Weeks passed, then months, but the case remained unsolved. However, 2 years after Jessica's death, on August 19, 2002, the detective who investigated the case received a call from the lab. They found a DNA match. The man it belonged to was named Robert Atkins, and he was in prison in Georgia. Robert Atkins was in trouble with the law. He was convicted of theft. He violated his probation in the state of Georgia and was sent back to prison. At the time, Georgia was one of the few states where, when prisoners were admitted, their DNA was collected from them and entered into a national database. That's how a DNA match was found, one might say by accident. Had Atkins behaved himself and not broken the law again, perhaps he never would have been linked to the Jessica Carpenter case. Investigators were stunned, and at the same time they wanted to know why he did it. How did he know Jessica? And who is he anyway? His name had never appeared in the Jessica Carpenter case before. A detective went to the prison to find answers to these questions. He began questioning Atkins, and he denied knowing Jessica. Then the detective started talking about the suffering of Judy, Jessica's mother, that she was just devastated, that she didn't know what to do or how to move on with her life. Atkins looked at the detective and said that he was sorry. He began to cry and asked for a break in the interview. He then confessed to killing Jessica Carpenter. Atkins later led investigators to the murder weapon, a bloody knife wrapped in a t-shirt that was buried under a bush. Based on Atkins's confession, investigators pieced together what happened to Jessica Carpenter. A week before her murder, Robert Atkins, an airborne express courier, delivered a package to Jessica's home. The following week, August 4, 2000, Atkins returned, but this time under false pretenses. Jessica opened the door, and Atkins said that he had probably delivered the package by mistake last week. Jessica replied that there had been no mistake. Atkins then asked if he could go inside and use the phone. Jessica allowed him in. He pretended to be on the phone with someone. When he realized there was no one else in the house, he attacked Jessica, carried her into the bedroom, and forced her to undress. She said she wouldn't tell anyone, but he looked at her and said, "No, you know me." He took a knife from the kitchen and then cut the phone cord in the kitchen as well. He used the phone cord to strangle Jessica and stabbed her in the neck. He then left, taking the knife with him, and continued to deliver packages in his van. The next day, he got married like nothing had happened, as if nothing had happened the day before. Jessica's family members felt anger when they learned the details of the crime. Jessica was gullible. She invited him into the house, offered him a glass of water. She was kind to him, and then he committed this horrible crime. On May 22, 2006, Robert Atkins struck a deal with prosecutors and pleaded guilty to 5 charges. He was facing the death penalty, but he agreed to plead guilty in exchange for a life sentence. Judge Diane Goodstein asked Atkins whether he understood that he will never be released from prison. "Do you understand that you will spend the remainder of your life behind bars?" she asked him. "Out feet first in a box." He said he did. Atkins was sentenced to 2 life sentences. As for Reynaldo Rivera, he was sentenced to death in 2004. Rivera told the jury that he was mentally ill and that doctors needed to study his illness to find a cure. He also said he still fantasized about killing his victims, warning that he would do it again if he was released, and asked for the death penalty. 12 years later, in 2016, Rivera recanted his testimony and began attempting to appeal his sentence. In October 2024, the court dismissed his final appeal. Today we will look at events that took place in 2005 in New York City, USA. On August 10, 2005, Seema Parsi came home to find the house in disarray and her daughter Eliza's bedroom locked. She was just a simple, sweet girl who had no enemies. In a panic, Seema called 911. It was an investigation with several suspects. Seema Parsi came home about 7 o'clock in the evening. She immediately sensed that something was wrong. The back door was unlocked. She assumed her daughter was still at work. The house was in chaos. Papers were strewn across the floor, drawers were open, things were scattered. Her first reaction was to call her daughter to make sure everything was okay, but she got no answer. This alarmed and upset her. She went to check her daughter's bedroom door, which turned out to be locked. Panic gripped her. She jumped outside, called 911, and waited for the police to arrive. She thought something terrible had happened, and she didn't want to face it alone. When the policemen entered the house, they swung open the door with force, which yielded with a crack to their onslaught. Inside, in the privacy of her own bedroom, lay the breathless Eliza Parsi, plunged into eternal rest. The young woman was only 18 years old, her life cut short so suddenly and cruelly. When the policeman brought the sorrowful news to Seema, the mother's heart could not bear it, and her bursting cry echoed through the neighborhood. People unaware of what had happened came out of their homes one by one to find out the details of what had happened. It was unthinkable for Seema to realize that the daughter she had hugged and laughed with just hours earlier was now dead. The detectives had to recreate the events of Elisa's last day in order to deduce the culprit. They began their investigation by interviewing Seema, Elisa's mother. When Seema left home at 10 a.m. to go to work, Eliza was still at home preparing for her workday, which began at 1 p.m. Seema was still at home. Seema got home around 7 p.m., which means that the crime occurred somewhere between 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. Through tears, Seema told details of her beloved daughter's life. They were very close. Seema was looking forward to her young daughter growing up, getting married and having children. She had just graduated from high school and was taking a year off to work and save some money. She was a very friendly, outgoing girl. Eliza grew up in a very religious family. Her mother and father divorced about a year before the crime, and her father returned to live in Israel. Eliza's mother was not the only family member interviewed at the scene. Eliza had a half-brother, Raviv Gabay. Raviv was in the kosher cookie business and lived with his wife in another part of the city. He was delivering cookies at the time of the crime. When he learned of his half-sister's death, he dropped everything and came to comfort his mother. Examining the crime scene, detectives tried to guess what exactly happened in Eliza's room. She was lying naked on the floor. Her face was covered by a pillow. There was a towel underneath, and her body was covered by a mattress. Her hair was still wet, so the detectives assumed she had just gotten out of the shower. There was still water in the tub. There were no visible injuries on Eliza's body other than the burst capillaries on her face. There were no major injuries on her neck. Forensics lifted fingerprints from every place they could. They packed the pillow that lay on Eliza's face and the towel she was lying on. There were several bloodstains on the towel, and skin particles were found under Eliza's fingernails. A towel and skin particles were sent to the laboratory, hoping to get a sample of the criminal's DNA. However, processing these clues took time. The detectives weren't going to stop investigating and just wait for the results. They had to look for suspects and take DNA samples from anyone who aroused even the slightest suspicion. They needed to figure out what led the perpetrator to the Parsi family home. There were several theories as to how Eliza was killed. The first was obviously a burglary. Given that the house was a mess, this was the most obvious one. After the police talked to Eliza's mother, they determined that there may have been a few $100s and some jewelry missing. In this particular case, it appeared that someone had entered through the back door. In interviewing neighbors, detectives learned that neighbors had seen a group of landscapers who were in the neighborhood at the time the crime occurred. The group of 5 were cutting grass, and no one would have paid attention if one of them had walked up to the back of the house and tried to open the door. Police spoke to everyone who worked near Eliza's home that day. Investigators took DNA samples and fingerprints from all 5 landscapers. Each of them was cooperative, but again, it took time to analyze this evidence. Analyzing the photos from the scene, the detectives concluded that Eliza probably knew her attacker. The fact that the victim's body had been carefully covered and carefully hidden confirmed this theory. The fact that the perpetrator was ashamed and remorseful for what he had done. He could not bear the sight of a dead person with whom he was acquainted. Looking for more evidence and motive, detectives spoke again with Eliza's half-brother, Raviv. He told them about Eliza's ex-boyfriend, with whom she had broken off a relationship shortly before the tragic end of her life. This man, who was controlling and aggressive, was passionate about getting Eliza back and, as Raviv was sure, had played a crucial role in the events that led to her death. Her ex-boyfriend's name was Marek. She was an Orthodox Jew, and he was a Muslim, came from a Muslim family, so some people wondered if that was the reason she broke up with him. The families initially didn't want them to be together. He started stalking her, following her to work, following her after work, finding out where she was, who she was socializing with. He just wouldn't take no for an answer. One day, he even broke into her house. She was asleep, and when she woke up, she saw him standing by her bed. He was certainly of interest as someone who detectives believed might have been involved in the incident. They began to look into his background and concluded that he had some ties to the underworld. What made it even more suspicious was that Marek had been spotted near the crime scene. When Eliza's house was cordoned off by the police, Marek was standing behind yellow tape among other curious onlookers. He was taken to the station for questioning, and of course he claimed he had nothing to do with what had happened to Eliza. He said what he had been doing on the day of the crime. He did not have a solid alibi, especially for the period between 1 and 7 p.m. Detectives took a DNA sample and fingerprints and requested a report on his cell phone activity. Afterward, Marek was released. He showed up at Eliza's funeral, angering her family. When Seema saw him, she screamed and squealed. For the ex-boyfriend to go to the funeral, from the detective's point of view, there could have been several reasons. First, he wanted to pretend to grieve for Eliza like everyone else. He may have also wanted to see other people's reactions and glean any possible information from conversations at the service. The desire to be close to the investigation may have been the reason for his presence there. At the same time, the investigators received the autopsy report. The medical examiner's office ruled that Parsi's death was a homicide by asphyxiation, noting that her mouth and nose had been covered and her neck compressed. It was also determined that Eliza had had intimate contact within the 24 hours preceding her death. Based on the fact that there were no characteristic injuries on her body, the experts concluded that the intimate contact was consensual. The next suspect was Peter Sullivan. He was 7 years older than Eliza and worked for the same transportation company as her. Colleagues said that Peter had shown interest in Eliza. What if she rejected him and he couldn't accept it? After examining numerous pieces of evidence and testimonies, detectives found that Eliza had an argument with Peter before her death. Witnesses claimed to have seen them arguing heatedly in the days before her death. Police were scrutinizing possible motives. Were jealousy and betrayal the explosive mixture that pushed him into an irreparable act? Or was there another unobvious reason? Peter was called to the police station for questioning. He was asked to talk about his relationship with Eliza. He didn't deny paying attention to her, but he said she didn't reciprocate. He wanted to invite her to dinner or a movie, but she refused, saying she did not have time. Then he was asked to tell about the quarrel, which had been witnessed by several colleagues. After this question, Peter became visibly agitated. According to him, he and Eliza had quarreled because she had asked him to leave her alone, and he thought he was doing nothing wrong. Peter denied any involvement in her death and said he was sorry she had died. Detectives asked Peter to give as much detail as possible about where he was the day Eliza died. He stated that he had a day off that day. He woke up at about 10 a.m. and spent the day at home, but since he lived alone, there was no one to confirm it. That fact added to the suspicion about Peter. Detectives interviewed his neighbors, and they all spoke well of him. But that could mean absolutely nothing. A lot of crimes are committed by seemingly good people. A surveillance camera was installed on the house of one of the neighbors, with Peter's house in the lens. Detectives obtained the footage from that camera and verified that Peter had not left the house all day, at least not through the front door. However, his house was positioned so that he would discreetly leave and come back in through the back door without anyone seeing it. They checked his cell phone records. According to the report, his phone was in the neighborhood where he lived at all times, but he could have left it at home if he knew the police would check it. Detectives asked Peter if he would agree to voluntarily provide a DNA sample. He refused, saying he was afraid his DNA could be used to frame him. It was very strange, and now Peter Sullivan was the prime suspect. They put him under surveillance. Detectives knew they could get a sample of his DNA even without his consent. One day, he was sitting in his car in the parking lot smoking before he went to work. He threw the cigarette butt on the pavement, and the detectives picked it up. Now they had another DNA sample to test. In today's world, where the internet is firmly embedded in everyday life, online dating has become a common thing. They promise new emotions, meetings with interesting people, and the prospect of romantic relationships. But behind virtual dating can lurk a great danger. The first, and perhaps the greatest risk of online dating is deception. The virtual world carries the illusion of anonymity, allowing users to create idealized versions of themselves. This can range from slight exaggerations to outright lies about age, appearance, marital status, and even gender. When it comes time to meet in real life, the sudden realization that the person opposite is not who they claim to be can cause not only disappointment, but also a sense of betrayal. Another threat is personal safety. Virtual dating often lacks the barriers that exist in offline interactions. As a result, users let their guard down, trusting new friends too hastily. Disclosing personal information can lead to serious problems, from data theft to physical harassment. Before you turn virtual into real, it's important to stay prudent. Check out the information about the person you're talking to, choose safe places to meet, and always trust your instincts. If you decide to take a risk and bring the interaction into the real world, be prepared for anything, and don't forget common sense and your own safety. Interviewing Eliza's friends, detectives discovered that she led a sort of secret life. Only her closest friends knew that she had an unbridled nature that caused her to frequent nightclubs in the city. But Eliza didn't just frequent the clubs. Detectives discovered that Eliza was meeting people online and getting intimate with those she met. Back then, there was no Instagram or Facebook yet. The internet was still in its infancy. It was kind of weird. Meeting people online was dangerous. You don't know what will happen to you if you find yourself in a closed room with someone you've never met before. The world was full of crazy people she could send a picture to, and that was enough to try to track her down in real life. She could say where she lived, and someone could come and attack her. Detectives began to look into Eliza's virtual life. They were able to discover that Eliza was supposed to meet someone she had met online, and she had spoken to him the night before she died. She was planning to meet him in the near future. Maybe he wanted something more and she turned him down. The police had to do a thorough background check. They traced the young man to a home in Brooklyn and brought him in for questioning. The investigation revealed that the day before Eliza was found dead, she had actually met a guy she had previously met online. He came to her house when her mother was at work and they had intimate contact. He was willing to cooperate with the police. He told detectives that he had met Eliza several times. All of the meetings took place at her home while her mother was away. If he arrived too early, he had to go around the block and wait for Seema to leave the house. He was surprised and upset when he learned of Eliza's death. However, he denied seeing her the day she was found dead. He volunteered his DNA. In the days that followed, detectives spoke to other people from the internet whom they were able to identify who had met Eliza. A DNA sample was taken from each of them. While the police were quietly looking into Eliza's secret life, the press publicized the information. Seema learned from the news that her 18-year-old daughter was having sexual intercourse with strangers. She couldn't believe it. The life Eliza had led in secrecy from her mother and brother had its consequences. She filed a police report that several men had intimate contact with her against her will. One day she went to a bar in Harlem. The next morning, when she woke up, there were several naked men around her. Could one of those 4 or 5 men have gotten back at her for going to the police? The police investigated, but they were unable to arrest anyone. It was a dead end. The case only moved forward when the lab tested the DNA samples. The DNA results ruled out any of the men Eliza met online, the landscaper's the ex-boyfriend, Peter. The DNA found on the towel belonged to a man, and that man was related to Eliza. Her only male relative who lived in New York was her half-brother, Raviv Gabay. Perhaps the blood was left on the towel because Raviv had wiped his face after shaving and a drop of blood had been left there. Such a possibility could not be ruled out. DNA testing can be a very useful investigative tool because it can prompt investigators to look at someone they had not previously considered. When Raviv first spoke to detectives, he said he was in the cookie delivery business. He said he was on Long Island at the time someone attacked his sister. This was easy to verify since there are surveillance cameras on the bridge. Detectives began to find out where he said he was during a certain time period. His statement didn't match the CCTV footage on the bridge, and that was enough to get a warrant to check Raviv's cell phone data. When they got the location of his cell phone, it turned out he was near Eliza's house at about 1:30 p.m. So why would he lie about being in another neighborhood at that time? Detectives began to determine if Raviv had a motive to take his half-sister's life. About a year before Eliza's death, Raviv got married. As a wedding gift, his family gave him a cookie manufacturing and delivery business. The problem was that Raviv did not know how to run the business, and things were not going well. They found out that he was trying to maintain for his wife the lifestyle she was used to. Her parents had a very nice house. They had more money than his family, and that was a lot of pressure on him. He wanted more money, and money is a good motive. Money often makes people do things they regret. But Raviv's financial problems didn't explain why Eliza was being targeted. He was really close to his half-sister. He kept an eye on her, asked what she was doing. There was nothing to indicate animosity between them or that she owed him money. Why would a brother kill his sister for no reason? It doesn't make any sense. The detectives called Raviv and asked him to come to the police station. They did not tell him that they considered him the prime suspect. At the station, Raviv was a little aggressive. He began to ask why the investigators were taking so long, as it had been a month since Eliza's death. He said that her ex-boyfriend had committed the crime, and he should be arrested. The detectives began questioning Raviv again about his whereabouts on the day of the crime, where he had been and when, and he started to answer the questions as usual. But then, he began to guess that he was being questioned for a reason, and he began to act more hostile. Then the detectives pointed out directly to him that he was lying. They started pressuring him and asking him why he did it. He didn't want to admit that he did it. People often deny the obvious, even when there is evidence. The blood on the towel could have been accidental, such as during an untidy shave. But the skin under Eliza's fingernails couldn't have been there from a simple handshake. She scratched the perpetrator, and DNA testing showed that the skin under Eliza's fingernails belonged to her half-brother. Raviv was arrested, and he finally confessed that he was the one who took Eliza's life, as well as his motive. He cried and told that things were not going well in the business. He believed that the business he had received as a wedding gift was actually worthless. He thought it was a bad gift. He learned that his mother had received some money from the sale of a house in Israel. He believed that the amount exceeded $25,000, so he thought that she had stashed the money somewhere. That's why he broke into the house. Eliza caught him going through their mother's room. Raviv knew that mother regularly left the house around 10 a.m. every day, leaving Eliza home alone. Eliza was supposed to go to work at 1 p.m. However, on the day she died, she called her boss and said she would be a little late. Raviv thought no one was in the house when he entered through the unlocked back door. He was in his mother's bedroom looking for money when Eliza came out of the shower wrapped in a towel. They started arguing, and the argument turned into a fight. Eliza fought back bravely, so she had skin under her fingernails. She fought for her life, but her brother was physically stronger than her. Realizing that Eliza was dead, Raviv took a pillow and covered her face with it, then took a mattress and covered her body. He returned to his van, which was still filled with cookies, and went back to work. Later that day, he went back to comfort his mother and looked like a very upset brother, but it turned out it was just an act. He never found any money in the house because, as it turned out, no money was there. Police have charged Raviv Gabay with taking the life of his half-sister. It was very difficult for the detectives to tell the mother that they had solved the crime and found out that her son had committed it. Seema was hysterical when they told her the truth about what happened to Eliza. She lost both her children. On May 2, 2006, Raviv Gabay pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter. He was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Today, we'll discuss the events that occurred in Tennessee. At about 4 a.m. on December 6, 2004, a wounded young man ran into one of the convenience stores located next to the Brandon Park apartment complex in Knoxville and asked to call 911. His name was Jason Imami, and he told the dispatcher that he was sleeping in his room but was woken up by the scream of his roommate, 21-year-old Janya Berry. When he entered the living room, he saw a man coming out of Janya's room. According to Jason, after they met eyes, the uninvited guest ran up to him and stabbed him, but he managed to fight back and escape from the apartment. Subsequently, his description of the attacker helped create a composite sketch posted around Knoxville for the next 3 years. Several police cars and an ambulance were immediately dispatched to the specified address. The paramedics found Janya at the entrance to the apartment complex. Judging by the prints, she was knocking on neighboring apartments in search of help. Her bloody fingerprints were found on the doors of all the neighbors on her floor, but unfortunately, none of these people opened the door and helped her. Janya was taken to the hospital, but despite all the efforts made, doctors could not save her. During the forensic examination, the experts found 20 stab wounds on Janya's body. Jason Imami, who called 911, had 1 stab wound in the chest area and several defense wounds on his hands. The police examined the apartment. It was, of course, empty by this time. They saw signs of a struggle in Janya's room and found a bent kitchen knife in the living room. It was the weapon of the crime. The perpetrator left bloody shoe prints leading from Janya's room to Jason's room and then to the back door, through which they left the apartment complex. Janya Berry was born on August 26, 1983, in Bristol, Tennessee, about 120 miles from Knoxville. She had two older brothers from her mother's previous marriage. After graduating high school in 2001, Jania enrolled at East Tennessee State University to study psychology and criminology. After she left her parents' home, Joan and Mike Berry, her mother and father, moved to Atlanta, Georgia. While studying at the university, Jania met Jason White. They attended the same courses. The friendly relationship between them quickly turned into a romantic one. Jason planned to become a lawyer, and at some point, Jania decided she wanted to be a lawyer too. She graduated from East Tennessee State University in 3.5 years, after which she and Jason went to Michigan, where they both enrolled in law school. After studying there for several months, Jania realized she had made the wrong choice. 6 weeks before her death, she moved from Michigan to Knoxville, Tennessee, where she planned to continue her studies and receive a master's degree in child psychology. This is what she really liked and what she was ready to connect her life with. Jason stayed in Michigan, and their relationship was now tested by time and distance. Joan and Mike Berry supported their daughter's decision to leave law school. After all, they knew she loved children and believed it was not worth wasting your life on something you did not like. Arriving in Knoxville, Jania moved into the apartment of a friend with whom she studied at East Tennessee State University. His name was Jason Amami, and he was 2 years older. Upon learning that Jania was moving to Knoxville, Jason invited her to live in one of the rooms of his apartment in Brandon Park. Jania believed she knew Jason well. Besides, he was dating her friend, so she accepted the offer and thought she would move out as soon as she got used to the new city and the rhythm of life. Trying to provide for herself, she got a part-time job at a jewelry store. On December 5, 2004, after the end of the work shift, she said "see you" to her coworkers and went home. But in the morning, Jania died in a local hospital, and her roommate Jason became the first suspect. Jason was taken to the hospital, where doctors gave him the help he needed and concluded that his life was not in danger. When examining the crime scene, the police noticed the absence of signs of forced entry. This could indicate that the perpetrator was either let into the apartment, or that he had a key, or maybe the front door was unlocked. There was another thing that interested the investigators: the Atlanta Braves cap found on Jania's bed. It belonged to Jania's neighbor, whose car was broken into that rainy night. That neighbor, Brian McLemore, reported 2 caps stolen, along with a stereo and CDs. The investigators found them at the apartment, except for the other hat. The police believed the person who took the caps did it to protect themselves from the rain, but only 1 cap was found. Perhaps this meant that there were 2 criminals. Tests found no hair inside the hat other than its legitimate owners. Jason Imami was quickly discharged from the hospital, and, seeing the special attention to his person from the police and realizing he was being considered a suspect, he came to the police station himself to answer all the questions. Jason and Jania's relationship was the subject of special interest to the investigators. The guy said that he studied with Jania at the university and that when she moved to Knoxville, he allowed her to live in his apartment until she found her own place. According to Jason, they were just friends. The detectives then asked him about the events leading up to his 911 call. He said that he returned from work at about 10:30 p.m. At that time, Jania was at home. She was sitting on the floor in the living room, wrapping Christmas gifts for orphan children. They chatted for a while, and then he went to bed and slept until he heard Jania scream. He got out of bed to go check what was going on. When he opened the door to the living room, he saw someone coming out of Jania's bedroom. Noticing Jason, this uninvited guest ran up and punched him in the face. Allegedly, Jason fell back on his bed, after which the perpetrator stabbed him with a knife several times. Then, as Jason claimed, lying on his back, he pushed his opponent to the floor with his feet. Without thinking twice, Jason started running. When he left the apartment, he no longer heard Jania's screams. Jason believed she escaped too. Without looking back, he ran with all his might towards the convenience store at the gas station, where he asked to call 911. Jason was asked how, in his opinion, The perpetrator got into the apartment. The apartment where the crime occurred is located in this complex on the second floor. The main entrance is on the parking lot side. The glass door there always stayed open. Once inside, you enter the hall, which unites the apartments on the first floor and has a staircase leading to the second. But every apartment in this residential complex has a back door. So any apartment there can be accessed in at least two ways. Jason said he didn't know if the back door was locked because it was rarely used, mostly to take out the trash. This version matched the evidence. After all, the bloody shoe prints led precisely to the back door, and they did not match Jason's shoe prints. The investigators asked him if he was ready to take a polygraph test, to which Jason said that he was because he wanted the police not to waste their time on him but to look for the real criminal. Strangely enough, Jason failed the test. When he was informed about it, he got angry and started shouting that he was not involved in this crime. Jania's family also began to suspect Jason Imami of involvement in her death. So when Jason came to Jania's funeral, her parents didn't like it. Jason was interrogated several times, but he was adamant that he was not involved in Jania's death. He claimed they were friends and he had no reason to harm her. The results of Jason's test were studied by a more experienced polygraph examiner who concluded that the person who conducted the testing made some mistakes. This meant Jason had passed the test. Jason's description of the criminal helped create a composite sketch which began to be distributed through the media. Another suspect was Jania's boyfriend, Jason White. But he was quickly excluded from the list of suspects since on the night when the crime was committed, he was talking to Jania on the phone at about midnight, and the cell tower receiving the signal from his phone was in Lansing, Michigan, where Jason studied at law school. The attack on Jania occurred about 4 hours after her phone conversation with Jason White. The distance from Lansing in Michigan to Knoxville in Tennessee is almost 600 miles. Jason couldn't have covered such a distance in 4 hours by car. The only way he could get to Tennessee faster was by plane. But as it turned out during the investigation, Jason didn't check in for any flights. Therefore, he was excluded from the list of potential suspects. Jania's parents also did not believe Jason White could have been involved in the crime. Joan was very close to her daughter, and Jania never once mentioned Jason White's rudeness or scenes of jealousy. Moreover, the couple had planned to get married in April 2005. But now, Jason had to put the purchased ring in his bride's coffin. Jania's family still believed that her roommate, Jason Imami, might be involved in what happened to her. However, the lab report confirmed that another person was in the apartment on the night of the crime. Forensics found blood of an unknown person on the knife, on the stairs leading from the back door downstairs, in Jania's room, in Jason's room, and on the back door handle. Apparently, the perpetrator cut themselves while stabbing Jania and Jason. The resulting DNA sample of the unknown suspect was checked, but no matches were found in the database. The fingerprint found on the knife handle also didn't bring any results. There were no matches in their files. The police also checked records from local hospitals, but no one sought medical help with such cuts for several weeks after the crime. Now, the police knew that there was definitely another person in the apartment besides the victim and her roommate. And even though Jason Imami was no longer considered a suspect, many blamed him for running away from the apartment without making sure Jania had also left it. In fact, Jason was blamed for surviving. He was forced to move to another state, and that's how he later commented on what happened and how it affected his life. I also wanted to let people know that I don't want to do interviews and TV media and press releases because I don't want to be remembered as a stabbing victim. Yes, I want this guy caught and put behind bars, but I would also like to get my life back on track. Since the incident, my life is not hunky-dory as everyone thinks it is. I have had nightmares, sleeplessness, pain. People act like as if this incident does not bother me because of how I handle myself in public, but believe me, it's different at home. It's been almost 2 years since the incident, and I just finally got enough balls to get my own apartment again. My brother and sister-in-law were nice enough to give me a place to stay while I still recovered. It's hard to be almost 25 years old and to be afraid to go to bed at night in your own home. The financial strain of the incident has also produced much stress. Insurance only covered about 25% of my hospital bills for my superficial stab wounds that were 2 millimeters from puncturing my eye, severed a gland in my cheek that produces saliva, multiple cuts on my hands that weren't treated because they bagged my hands, and a chest wound that was suspected of causing a pneumothorax. So call those superficial if you want, because of deductibles not being met. Just wanted to clear up a few more things. As for me, I wanted to let everyone know that I didn't flee. I moved back here to Colorado to be with my family. I moved to Tennessee with my parents, and they moved back to Colorado after finding out it wasn't for them. I stayed to enter college at East Tennessee State University, where I graduated with a bachelor's degree in accounting. I don't speak my mind about this case because it is at the discretion of my lawyer. I am sorry. I follow his advice, not others people's advice. After the authorities published a sketch of the suspect, the police received an anonymous call informing them that a group of teenagers had been stealing in the area where Janya lived. And one of these teenagers looked like a man whose image was being distributed by the police. This guy turned out to be 19-year-old Michael Perkafell. He had facial features similar to the sketch and lived a couple of miles from the crime scene. Moreover, the police had a warrant for his arrest in an unrelated case. When he was taken to the interrogation room, the detectives noticed his shoes. The sole pattern looked like footprints found at the crime scene. While waiting for a warrant to seize his shoes and get his DNA sample, the investigators questioned Michael. Strangely enough, the guy declared his involvement in the death of Janya and began to describe the apartment and how the crime was committed. But he was confused about the details and said mostly what could be learned from the news. When his fingerprints, DNA, and shoes were checked, everything fell into place. There were no matches, and Michael, according to the investigators, just wanted to be the center of attention. Janya's family distributed over 1,000 leaflets with a sketch of the suspect. In addition, a cash reward of $70,000 was offered for any valuable information. However, all this did not bring results, and the investigation stalled for several years. Joan and Mike Berry were ready to spend the rest of their lives searching for the man who deprived them of their daughter. They were constantly calling and meeting with the investigators so that Janya's case would not turn into a dusty folder on an archive shelf. The breakthrough in the case occurred in April 2007, when one of the drivers in Tennessee saw a billboard with an image of Janya and a sketch of the criminal. This driver called the police and said that he knew a similar-looking man and that his name was Taylor Lee Olson. Taylor Lee Olson was 20 years old. He grew up in a wealthy family but often committed minor crimes. Although he had come to the attention of police previously, all of his offenses were minor, so neither his DNA nor fingerprints were in the database. When the detectives found him and brought him to the station, Olson stated that he had nothing to do with Janya Berry's death. He allowed a sample of his DNA to be taken, after which he was released. The report from the laboratory came on September 20, 2007. It showed that DNA samples from the crime scene matched Olson's DNA. His blood was on the knife, on the stairs, and in Janya's room. His fingerprint was on the crime weapon. Olson was arrested and charged, but he said he did not know how his blood could have ended up at the crime scene. He was interrogated several times, and in the end, he finally confessed everything. Olson told the investigators that on the night the crime was committed, he and his friend were at the apartment complex where Janya lived. They wanted to steal a car and searched for an unlocked one, pulling on the door handles, but one of the residents saw them and shouted at them to get out. His friend ran away. As for Olson, he resorted to another method and began looking for unlocked doors in the residential complex to enter someone's apartment and steal car keys. He started checking the doors at the back of the building, and the first door that turned out to be unlocked led to the apartment where Janya lived. Lighting his way with his phone, he examined the living room, hallway, and kitchen, but did not find the keys to the car. Then he decided to enter the room where, as it turned out, Janya was sleeping. He opened the drawer of her bedside table and, rummaging in it for the keys, heard a woman's voice ask, "Who are you?" After that, according to Olson, the girl screamed and he felt a sharp pain in his arm. He claimed that Janya wounded him with a knife she slept with. After that, he became enraged, took possession of the knife, and stabbed Janya several times. However, the investigators did not believe that Janya slept with a knife in her room. They thought that Olson, not finding the keys in the living room and kitchen, decided to break into one of the bedrooms and look for them there. Assuming that someone was sleeping there and that this someone could probably wake up, he took a knife from the kitchen and entered Janya's room. She heard a noise, woke up, and started screaming, after which Olson attacked her with a knife. During the interrogation, he also stated that he did not remember anyone else being in the apartment except Janya. He said he only harmed her that night. Olson insisted that he did not want to take Janya's life and that it was an accident. "Somebody else wasn't there with you?" the detective asked. "I want to make real sure that no one was with you, just you." "No one," Olson said. "No one was with me." Shortly after, Olson radically changed his testimony, stating that the crime was committed not by him, but by his friend named Noah Cox. Cox, like Olson, had a criminal history and facial features similar to the sketch. Olson told the authorities that in December 2004, he lived with his friend Cox at Warren House, a complex located near Janya Berry's apartment in Brandon Park. According to Olson's new story, they entered Janya's apartment with Cox. When he entered Janya's bedroom, she woke up and started screaming. Upon hearing the scream, Cox ran in with a knife and began stabbing her, and Olson, as he claimed, ran away and did not see what happened next. But this version seemed even less believable. In addition to the DNA of Janya Berry and Jason Amami, the police found the DNA of only one person in the apartment and on the crime weapon, and this person was Taylor Lee Olson. There was absolutely no evidence that Cox was at the crime scene. It became known that during the investigation, the police heard Cox's name much earlier than Olson's. He was interrogated by the police 22 days after Janya's death. He denied any involvement in this crime and gave them a sample of his DNA, which showed no matches when compared with samples from the crime scene. There were no signs of a fight on him, no cuts, no bruises, no fresh scars. Even if Cox was in Janya's apartment that night, he left no trace. Unlike Taylor Lee Olson, records show Cox talked repeatedly with the investigators, including after Olson's arrest. He told authorities he passed out drunk in his apartment the night of the killing and found Olson gone when he awoke. Jason Imami was asked to identify the man who injured him, but he could not say for sure whether it was Olson or Cox. The trial was scheduled for September 2008. Joan Berry, Janya's mother, had a list of questions she wanted to ask the man who deprived her of her daughter. Every now and then, she would add more questions to it, hoping to get answers soon. But on March 24, 2008, 5 months before the trial, Taylor Lee Olson was found dead in a prison cell. He took his own life. In a farewell note, Olson reiterated his innocence and blamed Cox for the death of Janya Berry. Kevin Allen, a Knox County Assistant District Attorney General, would have prosecuted a trial in Berry's death. He said any case against Cox would have rested on self-serving claims by Olson and the testimony of 2 jailhouse snitches, one a friend of Olson who attended his funeral and the other an illegal substance user who bragged to cellmates about working with Taylor to set up Cox. There exists nothing concrete that would place anyone other than Taylor Olson and the victims at the crime scene, Allen wrote in a memo declaring the case closed. Although I find it improbable that Olson would enter into an obviously occupied dwelling alone, no forensic evidence from inside the apartment can lead me to conclude that a sustainable prosecution would be successful, Allen wrote. Although it's been closed, I don't know that the case offers closure to anyone involved, said Olson's former lawyer, Gregory Isaacs. It's one of those unfortunate crimes that will never be completely solved. Joan and Mike Berry called Olson's act the coward's admission of guilt. They had no doubt Olson took their daughter's life, but they did not exclude the possibility that Cox was also at the crime scene that night. They sued the Brandon Park apartment complex for failing to ensure the safety of residents. The parties were able to reach an agreement out of court. In 2007, the Janya Berry Act was signed into law in Tennessee, requiring the collection of DNA samples from persons convicted of serious crimes and persons arrested and accused of such crimes. Who, in your opinion, bears a greater resemblance to the sketch, Olson or Cox? Share your opinion in the comments, and thank you for watching this video to the end. On September 8, 2017, Taylor Wright, a 33-year-old recently divorced private investigator, was enjoying life with her girlfriend, Cassandra Waller. The two had just moved in together, and everything was going well, despite the stressful divorce proceedings that Taylor was going through with her ex-husband. That day, Taylor left the house to meet with a friend to relax a bit, but this decision changed not only her life, but the lives of everyone around her. So, today, we will look at the events that occurred in Pensacola, Florida. Taylor was born on April 23, 1984. When she was 19 years old, she met Jeff Wright. Their relationship had both ups and downs, but they still loved each other. 3 years after they met, they decided to get married. After Taylor graduated from the University of North Carolina in 2008, she took a job as a police officer in Jacksonville, North Carolina. In 2011, Taylor and Jeff had a son. Like many other couples who have just become parents, they have faced some challenges. Gradually, their relationship began to deteriorate, and as a result, in 2015, they started the divorce process, which was not easy. Jeff believed that Taylor was cheating on him. Soon after, Taylor moved to Pensacola and started living with Cassandra Waller, confirming Jeff's suspicions. Taylor and Jeff's divorce process was difficult because they could not agree on who their son would stay with. The financial component played an equally important role in this process. By this time, Taylor was no longer working for the police. She quit and became a private investigator. She had attacked Jeff several times and followed him when he was picking up their son. Taylor was arrested several times, and her behavior ruined her reputation. As a result, in 2016, Jeff received full custody of their son, which infuriated Taylor. Taylor wasn't ready to give up, initiating a new lawsuit. Yet, the former spouses could not come to a joint decision. In September 2017, they had serious financial disagreements. Deciding not to share money with Jeff, Taylor withdrew $100,000 from their joint account without his knowledge. But it was against court orders. The money in the account was supposed to be used for child support, but Taylor decided to empty the account. To hide the money, she split it up between her friends for temporary safekeeping. One of those friends was Ashley MacArthur, a former crime scene technician she had known for over a year. During this time, they had become quite close friends, and Taylor entrusted her with $34,000. Taylor had many problems, and soon, when she needed the money she had given Ashley for safekeeping, the problems became even bigger. Taylor repeatedly asked her friend to return the money, but the latter always found a new reason not to do so. She did not have time to withdraw it. There were problems with the bank, and so on. At some point, Taylor had a strong suspicion the money was gone. She persistently demanded that Ashley return the entire amount, but her friend never did, each time coming up with new excuses. On the evening of September 7, 2017, Taylor Wright and Cassandra Waller went to a restaurant for dinner. During dinner, Taylor told Cassandra about her problems and money worries. She talked a lot about Ashley and the money she didn't want to return. Taylor was sure there was something fishy there and that Ashley was stalling on purpose. Cassandra supported and comforted Taylor in every possible way, trying to convince her that the situation would be resolved. At the same time, she also suspected that the money was gone. Taylor told Cassandra that the next day, September 8th, she and Ashley were to meet and go to the bank to get her $34,000. On the morning of September 8th, Cassandra was going to work. As she was saying goodbye to Taylor, she saw Ashley sitting in a car near the driveway. Ashley came to meet with Taylor to finally sort out the problems with the bank. That morning, Cassandra saw Taylor for the last time. As the day progressed, Cassandra Waller lost contact with Taylor when she stopped responding to her text messages. She contacted Ashley, who said that Taylor had been stressed and crying throughout the day and needed time to herself. Things got even more strange when Taylor seemingly bailed on dinner plans with her girlfriend, telling Cassandra via text that she needed a few days to clear her head. Cassandra knew that as a private investigator, Taylor had the means and skills to disappear, and she grew worried. "I don't have any clue what's going on. I just know that something's not right. I was scared," Cassandra recalled. Although Cassandra received a text message from Taylor saying she needed time to clear her head, she suspected that Ashley, not Taylor, might have written that message. In the days that followed, Cassandra repeatedly tried to contact Taylor by phone, but she ignored her calls and messages. Yet, some of those messages were read. Taylor hadn't shown up at home, even though all her belongings were still there. Cassandra wanted to meet Taylor to make sure she was okay. Taylor's loved ones were also concerned because it was out of character for her to just disappear, especially without first contacting her young son. Cassandra then went to the police, who suggested that she reach out to Taylor's ex-husband, Jeff Wright, to investigate further on her own. Jeff told Cassandra that their son had also been trying to reach out to Taylor, but he had not gotten any response. He then issued a startling warning, telling Cassandra that Taylor may get angry with her for involving the police in her business and that she should be careful. Disturbed, Cassandra continued to search for her girlfriend and began calling hospitals in the area. After a week passed with no sign of Taylor, Cassandra filed a missing persons report, and authorities began an investigation. The investigators questioned Cassandra because she lived with Taylor and could tell a lot about her. They also searched their house and found Taylor's identity documents, cash, and a revolver. According to Cassandra, the weapon was bought solely for self-defense but was never used. Nothing else suspicious was found. But if Taylor decided to go somewhere, why didn't she take her ID, money, and belongings with her? Sitting in the interrogation room, Cassandra mentally asked herself a lot of questions. She quickly realized that the police were looking for clues that would help them link her to Taylor's disappearance. Despite this, she continued cooperating with the investigation to find out the truth. When her story was confirmed, the investigators switched to the next two people of interest: Taylor's ex-husband Jeff and her friend Ashley MacArthur. Since ex-partners are often involved in such cases, the theory that Taylor's ex-husband was involved in her disappearance looked quite convincing. They were still fighting for custody of their son and had financial disagreements. However, the version that Jeff could be involved in Taylor's disappearance was quickly ruled out, as he was in North Carolina all this time. Thus, the circle of potential suspects was narrowed down to one person: Ashley MacArthur. They reached out to Ashley, who was the last person among Taylor's friends to see her before she vanished. When Ashley was questioned at the police station, her behavior seemed strange. She was flirtatious and in high spirits, and it seemed she didn't care about her friend's disappearance. She said that a few weeks earlier, Taylor had withdrawn $34,000 from the joint account she shared with her ex-husband and given it to her for safekeeping during the divorce process. She also claimed that on the day they met, Taylor took the money, put it in a travel bag, and left. According to Ashley, she didn't think anything bad could have happened to her friend. In her first interview, Ashley told the detective that she had picked Taylor up on the morning of September 8th, and they drove to various locations during the day before going to MacArthur's family property to ride horses. Ashley claimed they then traveled back to her residence where Taylor had left in an Uber to go to a bar. In the police interview, Ashley was heard saying, "I don't believe Taylor's been harmed. I think Taylor is doing what Taylor does, but I don't know. She's always come across as being tough. She's always carrying weapons, whether it's knives or guns or whatever. She's not an easy target." According to Ashley's story, she has not seen or heard from Taylor since the latter got into the Uber and left. At the same time, Ashley allegedly tried to contact her by phone many times. After reviewing the messages between Ashley and Taylor, the investigators found numerous texts about money. It was obvious from the correspondence that Ashley was constantly finding new reasons not to return the money. After checking Ashley's statements, the investigators found no confirmation that Taylor had called Uber. With all this in mind, the police began to suspect that Ashley was hiding something, but they had no proof to charge her with anything. So far, The investigators had nothing but suspicions, so they let Ashley go. She contacted the police almost every day to see how the investigation was going. It seemed suspicious. After all, she had said earlier that she thought Taylor was fine. Ashley tried to help the investigators, remembering the new details of that day. She talked about several suspicious people she had seen Taylor with earlier. Although Ashley tried her best to show her interest, the detectives were still checking her possible involvement in her friend's disappearance. Ashley was supposed to give Taylor back her $34,000. The investigators knew that some people commit crimes for much less money, so they didn't rule out the possibility that Ashley might have gotten rid of her friend to avoid giving her back the money. Perhaps she had already spent it, so she was stalling in every way possible. When she realized that Taylor wouldn't leave her alone, perhaps she decided to get rid of the cause of her problems. Ashley's behavior confirmed this theory. There was another important reason why Ashley was on the list of suspects. MacArthur was a former crime scene technician. She had the knowledge that would allow her to carefully cover up the traces of the crime. Her husband Zachary was a former deputy sheriff, so there was a possibility that Ashley might have had connections with the police officers. Taylor was reported missing on September 14, 2017. In October, Ashley MacArthur was questioned for the second time. The investigators noticed serious changes in her behavior. She used to be outgoing and even flirtatious, but now she was very nervous. She realized that if she was being questioned a second time, it meant that the police had some evidence against her. And she was right. While weeks passed and Taylor failed to appear, a break in the case was not made until the investigators were finally granted access to Taylor's phone records. Within them, they discovered that Ashley's story of where she and Taylor had been on the day she vanished did not match up with where the phone records placed them. Authorities zeroed in on Ashley and began searching her and her husband's bank and phone records. They soon learned that on the day that Taylor was last seen alive, Ashley had made numerous calls from another property owned by the MacArthurs in a different part of town than where Ashley originally claimed to have been. Additionally, authorities learned that Ashley had deposited Taylor's $34,000 check into her bank account. While records showed that Zachary was not in the area on the day of Taylor's disappearance, suspicion toward Ashley continued to grow. Authorities were able to obtain a search warrant for 3 different properties owned by the MacArthurs, and on the day that they planned to execute the warrants, they invited Ashley down to the station for an interview to keep her out of the way. It was established that Ashley forged Taylor's signature on the check, but perhaps there was something much more sinister behind it all. Mobile phone records showed that Ashley lied about where she and Taylor were on the day the latter disappeared. You would probably agree that a person who worked as a crime scene technician and knew how the investigative process worked would lie during questioning. A sheriff's office spokesperson confirmed MacArthur worked as a sheriff's office crime scene technician from approximately June through November of 2006. According to the spokesperson, MacArthur resigned voluntarily. So, while the police were searching the properties owned by MacArthurs, Ashley was in the interrogation room and was very nervous. Her answers to the questions became more and more confusing. She was unable to come up with a convincing explanation when detectives pointed out the discrepancies between her statements and the information obtained during the investigation. Ashley insisted that Taylor had taken an Uber to buy illegal substances and then returned to the farm. She hadn't talked about it before, and it caught the attention of the investigators. They wanted to find out the reason for the concealment of this important information. Ashley replied that she didn't want to ruin Taylor's reputation. If everyone found out that Taylor was an occasional illegal substance user, it could have had a negative impact on her career as a private investigator. But why didn't Ashley call the police right away if her friend was supposed to be back but never showed up? After all, she could have been in danger. Ashley tried to show her concern, yet she didn't even try to find her friend. Why didn't she pay attention to what was happening until she was called in for questioning? All these questions remained unanswered, and the investigators were sure that Ashley was being dishonest with them. When the woman realized the police knew she was lying, She refused to answer further questions and demanded a lawyer. While Ashley denied having anything to do with Taylor's disappearance, a search team combed the farm where phone records showed Ashley and Taylor had been together on the day that she went missing. They initially turned up empty-handed, and investigators were forced to release Ashley. It was the morning of October 19, 2017. Later that day, the officers who continued to search the farm using police dogs came across a disturbing find. It was a small pit, recently dug into the ground, which had been carelessly concreted. Using a construction tool, the police officers started digging in that place, and the first thing they saw was a human skull with a bullet hole. The remains were in a shallow grave covered with earth and construction debris, and then concreted over. Someone was obviously trying to do everything possible to hide the body. The investigators began extracting the body and found a necklace that they had seen Taylor wearing in a photo. The examination confirmed that the remains belonged to Taylor Wright. 40-year-old Ashley MacArthur was arrested on the same evening on October 19, 2017. She was charged with taking the life of Taylor Wright. The trial began in August 2019. During the opening statement, Ashley MacArthur's defense attorney told the jury that there was no evidence linking his client to the crime. The prosecutor, however, argued that cell phone data and security footage that will be introduced during the trial will link Ashley Britt MacArthur to the 2017 death of Taylor Wright. In his opening statement, Ashley MacArthur's defense attorney, John Barroset, said the case lacked physical evidence. Barroset told jurors that no scientific, expert, or eyewitness testimony would be presented to demonstrate beyond a reasonable doubt that his client had anything to do with Taylor's death. He also called into question Taylor Wright's mental stability, referring to rumors that the woman had taken illegal substances around the time of her disappearance. The prosecutor, Assistant State Attorney Bridget Jensen, argued Ashley had a clear motive to kill Taylor: money. Jensen said when Taylor needed the money for court proceedings and to cover child support costs, she sent numerous text messages to Ashley requesting access to the funds, but Ashley found excuses to delay giving the money back to Taylor. On September 8, 2017, Ashley and Taylor agreed to meet in person and discuss the money. Ashley went missing that same day, Jensen pointed out. Another of Ashley's secrets was revealed during the trial. Ashley couldn't return the money to Taylor, as she had spent almost all of it. It became known that Ashley MacArthur, a married woman, had a secret affair with a man named Brandon Beatty. It was revealed that Ashley used Taylor's money to buy a boat for her secret lover. In court, Brandon admitted that Ashley constantly gave him expensive gifts, but he had no idea where she was getting the money from. Ashley MacArthur told the investigators that she and Taylor were riding horses at the farm on the day the latter disappeared. But the prosecutor told the jury that, according to cell tower records, Ashley MacArthur was far from the farm at the time she said she was there. Taylor Wright's body was found in October 2017, buried in a shallow grave on a piece of land owned by the MacArthur family. The grave was covered by concrete and potting soil. The prosecutor, Assistant State Attorney Bridget Jensen, told jurors they would also see a surveillance video taken from a local Home Depot of MacArthur purchasing potting soil and concrete in the days after Taylor Wright's disappearance. Detective Richard Gigliotti testified that when the investigators found Wright's body, what was left was a skeleton concealed under concrete and potting mix. Gigliotti said a projectile was found lodged in the back of the skull, but the condition of it made it difficult to match to a specific firearm. Ashley's defense attorney claimed she had back problems and would not have been able to move Taylor's body. Taylor was better prepared physically, so the defense tried to question the prosecutor's version. The attorney based his tactics on the fact that the police had no direct evidence of Ashley's guilt. There was no crime weapon, witnesses, or DNA evidence. The attorney argued that the type of bullet that fatally wounded Taylor Wright could not be accurately matched to any of the firearms presented by the prosecution as evidence. Even though Jeff, Taylor's ex-husband, was checked at the early stages of the investigation and was excluded from the list of suspects because of a reliable alibi, Ashley's defense attorney tried to present him as a person who had a motive to take Taylor's life, but these attempts failed. During the trial, it became known that Ashley boasted about her plans to take Taylor's life. One local bartender and friend of Ashley, Audrey Warren, alleged in court that she had told her plans to overdose Taylor on a strong illegal substance. She said she was going to put the substance in Taylor's beer, Audrey said. She said this world would be better if Taylor wasn't here and she wasn't a good person, once that she was too small to hurt anybody, so she'd just shoot them. The charges related to Taylor Wright's death were not the only ones Ashley MacArthur faced. During a week-long trial, jurors heard evidence that while working at her family business, Pensacola Automatic Amusement, from 2015 to 2017, MacArthur embezzled thousands of dollars from clients, the Azalea Cocktail Lounge and Seville Quarter. Pensacola Automatic Amusement serviced entertainment machines and jukeboxes for various clients in the Pensacola area for 40 years. At trial, witnesses testified that Pensacola Automatic Amusement typically operates on an arrangement where the company splits the revenue from the rented machines 50/50ths with clients. However, MacArthur allegedly violated the agreement by only handing over half of the cash proceeds. Payments made via debit cards, credit cards, or smartphone apps she kept for herself, prosecutors claim. According to charging documents, between July 2015 and June 2017, MacArthur pocketed about $13,000 in profits that should have gone to the Azalea and approximately $300 that belonged to Seville. Jurors heard evidence that a fire broke out at Pensacola Automatic Amusement the day MacArthur was scheduled to meet with the Azalea's management about the missing revenue. In testifying before the jury, an investigator for the state fire marshal's office said there were two separate fires, one in a downstairs hallway and another in an open space on the second floor. An analyst who tested samples from the scene of the blaze reported finding traces of kerosene or diesel fuel. According to witnesses, the business's security alarm triggered twice in the late-night, early morning hours before the fire, and MacArthur went by both times to check things out. In statements to investigators, she said the building seemed fine both times, but when she went to work around 9 a.m., she noticed fog around the building and called the fire department. She reportedly told investigators the fire may have been caused by disgruntled ex-employees. Larry Johnson, a former Pensacola City Council member and the owner of the Azalea Cocktail Lounge, described MacArthur as a world-class con artist. "This is a very dangerous individual," he told the court. "I believe there are other people who have been harmed and haven't come forward. She's a world-class con artist. She conned me, and I believe she deserves a significant prison sentence." After hearing the arguments, Judge Jan Shackelford sentenced MacArthur to 84 months in state prison, followed by 3 years of probation. Now, let's get back to the Taylor Wright case. The jury deliberated for more than 2 hours to render the guilty verdict. After a 4-day trial, a jury found Ashley guilty, and a judge sentenced her to life in prison with a mandatory 25 years served. MacArthur appealed, seeking a new trial because the jury inadvertently saw a photo of MacArthur pointing a shotgun. She also argued that the trial court erroneously admitted statements she made to law enforcement, certain cell phone records, and the victim's text messages. Her attempt to appeal the verdict failed. As of 2024, MacArthur remains incarcerated at Lowell Annex Correctional Institution in Ocala, currently serving out her sentence of life in prison with a minimum of 25 years. When 16-year-old Megan Landowski was found in her home with no signs of life, the police wasted no time and launched a full-scale investigation. The person who found Megan's body and called 911 was her stepfather, Chris Short. At first, The police focused on the suspect that Megan's family had pointed out, but when that suspect was ruled out, the investigators were left with few clues about who could have wanted the popular high school student dead. So, this story happened in Portsmouth, Virginia. In 2008, Megan lived with her mother and stepfather. She had 2 siblings. Chris served in the Navy, and before moving to Portsmouth, they lived in Cuba, in Guantanamo. After moving to Portsmouth, Megan started taking dance classes. She always loved dancing, but there were no dancing classes in Guantanamo. Therefore, Megan was glad to move to Virginia. But unfortunately, this joy did not last long. Megan's parents described her as a typical teenager. She was growing up, meeting new people, and making new friends, and her interests were gradually changing. Megan spent her first year studying at a special arts school for talented dancers, singers, and musicians. Then she continued her studies at another school. Thursday, April 10, 2008, began like other days. Angie Short, Megan's mom, remembers that she woke up her daughter, they had breakfast, and then she drove her to school. Before getting out of the car, Megan told her mom that she loved her and that she would call her as soon as she got home. Those were the last words Angie heard from her daughter. At about 4 p.m., Megan's stepfather, Chris Short, finished work at the Naval Hospital and returned home. When he reached the house and got out of the car, he instantly saw a strange detail. The front door was open. Megan's parents always told her to lock the door when she was home alone. The first thing Chris thought about was that Megan had simply forgotten to lock it. He didn't even know what he would face in just a minute. He entered the house, closed the door behind him, and called Megan's name, but she did not respond. And then Chris saw Megan lying on the kitchen floor in a pool of blood. She showed no signs of life. Chris got numb for a moment. He couldn't believe that Megan, whom he considered his own child, was dead. Chris called 911. Police Sergeant Robert McDaniel was one of the first officers to arrive at the scene and made the heartbreaking discovery that Megan Landowski was the victim. He knew her well because he was investigating another case that Megan was involved in, but we'll talk about it a little later. When examining the crime scene, the officers saw that there was blood on the handle of the front door, but there were no signs of forced entry. Megan was lying on the floor, and she was naked from the waist down. There were multiple stab wounds on her body. Her skirt and underwear were found thrown on the floor upstairs. The police quickly ruled out the version that Megan let the criminal inside herself. Examining the house, forensic experts found a large leaf. Going outside, they saw a shrub growing under the bedroom window on the first floor. Its leaves were identical to the leaf found inside the house. The bedroom window was unlocked and the screen was up. The police had little doubt that the perpetrator had entered the house through the bedroom window on the first floor. He caught on a shrub, and thus, one leaf ended up inside Megan's home. Presumably, once inside the house, he attacked Megan and forced her to go upstairs, where he tied her hands with duct tape and also taped her mouth so that she could not scream. The bed was all rumpled, which indicated a struggle. It's not hard to guess what the perpetrator did after he took off Megan's skirt and underwear. Experts found seminal fluid on the blanket. The investigators suggested that after that, the perpetrator forced Megan to go downstairs, where he took her life. Perhaps he was afraid that she would identify him later. The police did not rule out the possibility that Megan knew the person who attacked her. Footprints on the floor led from the body to the front door. It turned out that after taking Megan's life, the perpetrator left through the front door, but no one saw him. The police had 2 crime scenes, one upstairs and the other on the first floor, where Chris found Megan's body. The weapon of the crime turned out to be a knife, which the criminal found in the kitchen. After Megan died, he threw this knife in the sink. The forensic experts concluded that there were more than 40 stab wounds on Megan's body. 7 of them were inflicted after her death. The large number of wounds on Megan's body gave reason to assume that what happened was not a random attack. The police also established that the perpetrator used 2 different knives, but only one was found in the house. The blood on the front door was analyzed, and it turned out that it contained 2 different DNA. One belonged to Megan, and the other most likely belonged to the perpetrator. It could explain why the police found only one knife. Perhaps the perpetrator cut himself when attacking Megan, and there was his blood on the second knife, so he took it with him. The police needed to act quickly. There was a criminal on the loose who took the life of a child. The locals were worried and became more vigilant. The detectives interviewed the neighbors, but it didn't give any results. No one saw or heard anything unusual. There were also no surveillance cameras installed nearby. When the detectives talked to Megan's parents, they got the name of the first suspect. Chris and Angie did not doubt that the person who attacked Megan was 44-year-old Robert Hickey. He was a friend of Chris and also served in the U.S. Navy. But why did Chris suspect his friend of involvement in this crime? Here's what Chris said when talking about those events. When Megan was 15 years old, we noticed a change in her behavior. Her grades were dropping. And I told her, I said, if you don't start telling me why your attitude is changing, I'm gonna fix it. And that's when she told me that a friend of mine, a guy that I trusted like a brother, was touching her. Robert Hickey was in the Navy with me. This guy was Sailor of the Year. This is my best friend, and I trusted him more than I would trust just about anybody else, Chris said of discovering the devastating betrayal. After Chris and Angie found out that Robert Hickey had been touching Megan inappropriately, they convinced her to go to the police. The case was assigned to Sergeant Robert McDaniel, whom I mentioned earlier. Megan told him that she was afraid of Hickey. In Virginia, the age of consent is 15 years old. Hickey claimed that Megan did not mind that he touched her, and therefore the police could not charge him with anything. The Naval Criminal Investigative Service eventually took over the case because Hickey, a naval officer at the time, could have faced stronger punishment through their system. If Hickey had been found guilty, he would have stood to lose his job, his security, his retirement, and he would have gone to jail. Robert Hickey was a naval hospital corpsman with a wife and 4 daughters of his own. During the investigation, he continued to lead a normal lifestyle, going to work and returning home at night. But he was expecting a hearing, and Megan had to testify against him. Therefore, Hickey had a motive to take Megan's life. He was the perfect suspect, so the police, of course, wanted to question him. Taken into custody at his home, he did not resist arrest. When informed that Megan Landowski was dead and that he was a prime suspect, Hickey knelt down and began to cry. He was taken to the Portsmouth Police Department, where he stated that he had nothing to do with Megan's death. I can tell you, from the time I got up to the time that you saw me, I was with someone every second of the entire day, except for the moment I went to the bathroom, he said. At one point, the investigators left him alone in the interrogation room to watch his behavior. He was clearly upset and scared. When they questioned him, he was nervous. The investigators asked Hickey when was the last time he was at Megan's house. He replied that it was in December, 4 months before Megan's death. When asked if his fingerprints could be in her house, Hickey replied that even if they were there, they were left by him back in December. A group of Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents searched Robert Hickey's house. They hoped they would find blood-stained clothes or shoes, but the search brought no results. They examined Hickey's computer and found no communication between him and Megan. He apparently didn't write her any emails after she told the police and her parents about his inappropriate behavior. While searching for evidence in Megan's house, the police found shoe prints. Hickey had sneakers with a similar type print, but upon examination, it turned out that it did not match the prints found in Megan's house. The police also thoroughly checked Hickey's alibi. He said he was at work all day, and his colleagues confirmed it. However, the police wanted to check if he had left the base during that day. The investigators checked the footage from the surveillance cameras installed at the gates of Naval Station Norfolk that recorded everyone who entered and left there. It turned out that Robert Hickey had not left the base during the day, at least not in his private car. To rule out the possibility that Hickey used any other car, the investigators conducted an experiment. They wanted to know how long it would take to get from the base to Megan's house. They drove it with the traffic of the day, trying to match everything to the time frame it would actually take for Robert Hickey to go from the base to her house and then back to the base. During this experiment, it became clear that Hickey would not have been able to leave the base unnoticed, commit a crime, and then return during that time frame. The man voluntarily provided a sample of his DNA. After the examination, however, it became clear that Robert Hickey was not involved in this crime. His DNA didn't match the DNA found at the crime scene. After Megan's death, the inappropriate behavior case against him was closed, and he was later discharged from the Navy. But then, who took the life of Megan Landowski? The police had a theory that Hickey could have hired someone to commit this crime, but they had no evidence to back it up. After Hickey was ruled out as a suspect, Megan's parents were confused. They didn't know who could have wanted to harm their daughter. The investigators, of course, checked for Chris Short's involvement in this crime. It's common practice for police to check for family members' involvement in such cases. Chris treated Megan like his own daughter, and they were very close. At the same time, he was the one who found her dead, and he was the one who called 911. But the DNA examination showed that Chris was not involved in what happened to Megan. All the obvious suspects were checked by the police, but it did not yield results. The investigators again wondered if Megan knew the person who attacked her. The number and nature of the wounds on Megan's body led them to believe that the perpetrator had a personal score to settle with her. The one who committed this crime was very angry with her. Otherwise, how do you explain the fact that he stabbed her 7 times after her death? The profilers who studied the case believed that the crime was committed by a young man about the same age as Megan. It was indirectly indicated by shoe prints at the crime scene, which, as it turned out, were left by Nike Air Force sneakers. Given all this, the investigators decided to go to the school where Megan studied. A school is a place full of potential suspects. Maybe Megan had a fight with someone and didn't tell her parents about it. Children have their own lives at school, and most parents don't know much about it. All the students the investigators had a chance to talk to spoke well of Megan. She was popular at school and friendly with everyone. They found out that Megan had been in contact with several guys, but she wasn't in romantic relationships with any of them. The officers started wondering if someone she had rejected could have been involved in this crime. During the investigation, they heard several names and collected around 80 voluntary DNA samples. But this did not help solve the case. There were no matches. While studying Megan's diary, the detectives found something that caught their attention. There were some details of her relationship with a guy named Donald. Megan broke up with him a few months before her death. According to her parents, they were always against this relationship, as they believed that Donald was a bad influence on Megan. The investigators decided to talk to Donald, and it didn't take them long to find him. He was in jail because he had been arrested a few days earlier for driving without a license. During questioning, Donald behaved quite emotionally. He admitted that he had been dating Megan behind her parents' backs. Donald knew that Chris and Angie were against this relationship. According to Donald, it was because he was 2 years older than Megan. Through tears, he swore that he had only good memories of Megan. Donald didn't understand how anyone could be so cruel as to commit this terrible crime. He told the detective that Megan was the one who had decided to break up with him. The detective began to pressure Donald, but the latter was adamant that he was not involved in this crime.
I didn't have nothing to do with this girl, I swear to you.
He agreed to provide a sample of his DNA, and after a swab was taken from his mouth, he was sent back to jail, where he was held for driving without a license. When the lab analyzed Donald's DNA, the police faced a new disappointment. His DNA did not match the one found at the crime scene. Thus, it was another dead end. It had been several months, but the police had no new suspects. This, of course, was another challenge for Megan's parents. Chris and Angie were afraid that the perpetrator might get away with it. Having no new leads, the investigators decided to seek the help of science. They sent a DNA sample of the perpetrator to Florida. There was a lab in Florida that had improved their DNA capabilities to the point that they were able to determine what race the person was. According to some media reports, in 2008, it was a relatively new method of DNA testing, so the lab established that the criminal's ancestors were from Africa. This changed the direction of the investigation. None of the suspects the police had were African American. The investigators took a fresh look at Megan's life and the evidence they had. It turned out that she attended martial arts classes run by an African American. This man agreed to provide a sample of his DNA and was eventually excluded from the list of potential suspects because the DNA did not match. After that, the investigators talked to Chris about Megan and learned something that was of interest to them. They discovered she was involved with a youth center at the Navy shipyard. At this center, there was a counselor for the military. He was close to Megan. He was African American. He'd had direct contact with her as one of her counselors. She talked to him all the time, and it was believed that it was a possibility he wanted more out of a relationship with Megan because of the way he acted around the family. The police did not have his DNA profile. When the detectives met with this man, he refused to provide them with a sample of his DNA. He said he would rather go down to the police station, but he didn't show up at the appointment. He did everything to try to avoid being questioned or talked to. His behavior suggested that he had something to hide. The police had him under surveillance. One day, he went to the youth center. When he parked and left, a police officer took a swab from the door handle of his car. The analysis did not reveal any matches with the DNA found in Megan's house. Thus, it was another dead end. In September 2008, 5 months after Megan's death, there was a memorial walk in her honor. Several police officers took part in this event and promised the family they would definitely find the culprit. And during that walk, Megan's old bus driver came up to one of the detectives and said, "You guys need to look at Robert Barnes. He rides my bus, and he and Megan would flirt back and forth together, and I think you really need to look at this kid." The police had not heard his name before because he attended Churchland High School. Megan attended Woodrow Wilson High School, but at Churchland High School, she was accepted into the program for gifted and talented students. She was only in this program for a year. Robert Barnes was a 16-year-old junior at the time, so they were both in the performing arts program. He played the violin in the orchestra, and she was a dancer. Robert Barnes would come over 2-3 times a week to catch the bus with Megan. They didn't hang out together or anything like that. They were just friendly with each other. The investigators went to Churchland High School and met Robert Barnes for the first time. He was smiling and very polite. He gave the impression of an intelligent young man. Sergeant Robert McDaniel explained why they wanted to talk to him and asked if he would give them a sample of his DNA. Barnes replied that before doing this, he needed to ask his mother and see if she would be okay with that. The next day, Robert called Sergeant McDaniel and said he wanted to meet. During this phone conversation, Robert said he remembered important information about Megan and wanted McDaniel to come to his school. When McDaniel came to the school and met Robert, his hopes that he would learn something new were not realized. Robert was saying what he had heard on the news, and this conversation seemed like a waste of time. All McDaniel was interested in at that moment was the DNA sample. He asked Robert, "Hey, did you talk to your mom last night about giving me a DNA sample?" Robert replied that he had not spoken to her, but said that there should be no problem with that. Robert offered Sergeant McDaniel to take the gum he was chewing during the conversation. McDaniel knew it was a great source of DNA, so he took it and sent it to the lab. It was about 2 weeks before McDaniel got a call from the lab. There was a problem with Robert Barnes's DNA sample. The expert asked McDaniel if he had seen Robert spit gum out of his mouth. McDaniel remembered that he had to look away for a moment to get out of his pocket the latex glove in which he had wrapped the gum. So he did not see Robert take the gum out of his mouth. The lab found that the DNA on the gum was from a female. This surprised McDaniel, further convincing him that Robert Barnes was hiding something. On October 23, 2008, McDaniel contacted Robert's mother and received permission from her to pick him up from school and take him to the police station. Here's how Sergeant McDaniel remembers that day. "So the following day, I went to the school and I asked Robert would he come with me to do an interview. As we're walking out to my car, Robert takes his hands and slides it up into the sleeve of his shirt and opens the door with the sleeve of his jacket that he had on so that he didn't touch the door. Robert was using forensic countermeasures to try to prevent us from getting a DNA sample off the door of the car. Robert Barnes was now the prime suspect. When he was brought to the station, McDaniel informed him that the police knew he had tried to deceive them by switching the gum. After that, Robert started talking. However, it was not what everyone expected to hear. He admitted he was at Megan's house on April 10th, but claimed she invited him herself. Allegedly, he knocked on the door for about 5 minutes, but no one opened it. So he decided to get into her home through the window. He saw that the window in the bedroom on the first floor was open and entered the house through it. He started calling Megan's name, and she responded and asked him to come upstairs. When he entered her room, he saw that Megan was not alone. She was sitting on the bed, and next to her was a man in a black mask who pointed a gun at her. Suddenly, this man pointed a gun at Robert and started giving him orders. He told him to come closer. Then, according to Robert, the man in the black mask ordered him to tie Megan up and tape her mouth. After that, the masked man ordered Robert to enter into intimate contact with Megan. Megan resisted, but Robert asked her to do what the masked man told them to do. Then, as Robert claimed, this man ordered them to go downstairs. He and Megan were terrified, and the masked man was enraged. He grabbed a knife and attacked Megan. The man then took another knife and cut Robert's finger. He mixed his blood with Megan's and said that if he told anyone about it, both he and his family would regret it. Then, as Robert claimed, the masked man allowed him to leave. Robert ran away with a knife in his hands, but he threw it into a ditch not far from Megan's house. The investigators, however, didn't buy the story. All the evidence, including DNA, blood, and fingerprints, matched to only Barnes. The police also discovered disturbing material on his computer that showed the responsible student was also very much into a fantasy world of breaking into houses and committing crimes against women. Barnes had even photoshopped his own picture into a news article about such a crime committed against an elderly woman during a burglary. Robert Barnes was arrested and charged with taking the life of Megan Landowski. After the arrest, the investigators obtained a warrant and took a DNA sample from him. It matched the DNA found in Megan's house. Barnes eventually took a plea deal. He gave no motive but pleaded guilty to what happened to Megan. Before the judge announced the verdict, Megan's mother turned to Barnes and said, "Robert, she thought of you as her brother, and she loved you as a brother, but yet you took her life. You have to live with that for the rest of your life, and I hope you see her every day." Robert Barnes was sentenced to 42 years in prison. The earliest possible date for his release is 2045. He would be 53 years old. On February 17, 2023, in Hexham, England, mourners gathered for the funeral of 15-year-old Holly Newton, who was described as a popular girl who was loved by so many people. Hundreds of people joined a procession towards Hexham Abbey to pay tribute to the helpful and kind teenager who was attacked in the quiet country town on January 27. Speaking to mourners at her service, Holly's mother, Michaela Trussler, said of her shy daughter, who loved to perform for others, "Some people are just too good for this world, and Holly was one of them." Holly's white coffin was pulled along the high street by 4 black horses wearing purple jackets, her favorite color, while the top of the coffin was also adorned with purple flowers and messages of condolence. One read, "Sleep tight, beautiful Holly in the sky until we meet again. Love you forever." So today we are going to look at events that took place in the year 2023 in England. Holly Newton was just 15 years old when her story hit the headlines and television news. While investigating what happened to her, detectives got hold of chilling CCTV footage that captured the last minutes of Holly's life. A verdict in the case was handed down earlier this month. Holly Newton was known as a bright and caring individual with a promising future. Holly was described by her family and friends as a thoughtful and compassionate young lady who was a positive influence on those around her. Known for her outgoing personality, Holly loved spending time with friends and participating in social activities. Her friendly demeanor allowed her to easily find common ground with others. Holly was a quiet girl who loved dancing and had a strong sense of right and wrong, her mother said. Holly Newton and Logan McPhail met through their involvement in Army Cadets, a youth organization that provides military training and activities for young people. This environment often brings together people with common interests in discipline, teamwork, and outdoor activities, which likely contributed to their initial connection. Their relationship began as a typical teenage romance. They spent time together with common interests and social circles. However, as their relationship progressed, it became increasingly problematic due to Logan's controlling behavior. This control manifested itself in a variety of ways, including his insistence on knowing Holly's whereabouts at all times and his interference with her social media accounts. He reportedly changed her passwords to limit her interactions with others, a classic sign of controlling behavior where one partner seeks to dominate the other. Friends and family have noticed Holly becoming increasingly isolated. Despite these red flags, Holly initially remained in a relationship with Logan, which is not uncommon among teens who may not fully recognize or understand the signs of an unhealthy relationship. Holly's mother, Makala Trussler, said Logan McPhail was Holly's first and only boyfriend, and that it was a typical teenage relationship with ups and downs. Logan spent weekends with Holly's family. Holly's mother and stepfather had no idea that Logan was playing the role of the good guy when he came to their house. However, problems in Holly and Logan's relationship grew like a snowball. Eventually, Holly decided to end the relationship due to Logan's increasingly obsessive behavior. The breakup did not sit well with him. He had a hard time accepting it and became even more fixated on her. Makala Trussler said it was clear her caring and thoughtful daughter had been more mature than McPhail, but when she had tried to break up with him, he had used emotional blackmail and scared Holly. "I was not aware of the sheer scale of turmoil Holly was going through at the time," she said, adding McPhail had been obsessed with Holly and thought if he couldn't have her, no one else could. She also said red flags about his controlling behavior were not recognized until it was too late, and she had not realized the emotional turmoil Holly was being put through when trying to break up with McPhail. McPhail's reaction to the breakup was extreme. He began following Holly around town and continued to try to control her life even after she made clear her desire to move on. McPhail turned up uninvited outside her house in Haltwhistle on the night of the 26th of January and had to be taken back to his home in Bertley by police. Holly and her parents were actually due to meet police to discuss their fears about McPhail, but there was a tragic twist of fate. After McPhail turned up at their home in Haltwhistle uninvited and demanding to speak to Holly on the night of the 26th of January, Holly's mother, Makala Trussler, contacted Northumbria police. A meeting was scheduled for about 4 p.m. on the 27th of January, but Holly begged for it to be pushed back so she could go out with her friends after school instead. The meeting with the police was rescheduled for the evening, but a few hours before it was to take place, something terrible happened to Holly. The chronology of events that took place the day after McPhail showed up uninvited outside Holly's house was reconstructed using CCTV. He couldn't accept that Holly had ended their relationship. The following day, with a kitchen knife in his backpack, he left his school in Gateshead early and got the bus to Hexham, where he waited for Holly to head into town. Dressed all in black with a black face mask and baseball cap concealing his identity, McPhail followed Holly and her friends as they visited a leisure center and shops for about 45 minutes. He also made repeated contact with those close to Holly through voice messages in a bid to convince her to meet up with him face to face. As Holly and the boy visited a takeaway on the town's high street, he then approached her and asked if she would talk with him in a nearby alleyway. After following him, MacPhail then launched a violent attack on Holly, stabbing her multiple times. When her friend heard Holly cry out, he left the shop and intervened, before he was also stabbed in the shoulder and leg. Shortly after 5:10 p.m. on Friday, January 27, 2023, police were called to reports that a boy and girl had been seriously assaulted in the Priest Popple area of the town center. Emergency services attended and found them in a nearby alleyway with several stab wounds, and they were both rushed to hospital. Despite the efforts of medical personnel, Holly died after suffering 36 injuries. She broke up with MacPhail 6 days before the attack. The boy, who cannot be named for legal reasons, received treatment and was later discharged. Officers swiftly arrested Logan MacPhail, then 16, at the scene after he was detained in a bus shelter by brave passers-by. When arrested by police, body cam footage shows how he identified himself and told arresting officers the name of his victim. He then said, in an apparent confession, "She was being too horrible to me." Speaking to an officer in the back of a police van, MacPhail later refused to tell officers his date of birth, saying, "I can't read or write. I know nothing."
Right, put your hands behind your back. Right, you're under arrest on suspicion of an assault. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned something that you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Do you understand? Yeah? It's banned now. Where? In the alleyway.
By the way, do you want my card on the floor? Right there on the floor.
Have you got anything in your pockets?
My phone.
What's your name?
Logan MacPhail.
Logan.
Logan Shane MacPhail.
Who's the lass? Do you know her name?
Holly Newton.
Who?
Holly Newton.
Newton. Where's she from?
She's been too horrible to me, and that night was after I meant to kill myself. I was meant to kill myself. So I went too far.
What's your date of birth? You don't know. Stop being clever, right? You know how much bother you're in.
Right.
What's your date of birth?
Can't read or write.
Right. But you know what your day of birthday is?
No, I don't.
Huh?
I know nothing.
You don't know anything. You don't know what day your birthday is. How old are you?
16.
16. Where are you from? Where'd you live? Where'd you live?
After the attack, MacPhail was charged with taking Holly Newton's life and injuring another 16-year-old teenager. During police interviews, MacPhail displayed a chilling lack of emotion and admitted that he intended to kill Holly, reiterating that he did so because she was horrible to him. It took 18 months for the case to get to court because MacPhail's legal team had argued his learning difficulties and autism diagnosis made him unfit to plead. This would have meant he was unable to fully comprehend the criminal proceedings, but after hearing evidence from various experts, the judge ruled that he was capable of following the process. Throughout the trial, the defense team suggested that his various issues meant he did not understand the consequences of his actions, but jurors did not agree. Justice Hilliard told MacPhail, "You wanted to get Holly into the alleyway, which was out of sight, so you would have the best opportunity to attack her without anyone intervening. I am satisfied you had decided to attack Holly because you knew for sure, from her reactions at the bus stop, she was not open to any suggestion of resuming the relationship. You were filled with resentment and jealousy, but still able to calculate where you could best attack her, and you waited until you got that opportunity. You managed to persuade her to come a little further into the alleyway, waited until one passerby had gone on his way, and then took the knife out of your pocket and launched an attack on her which was vicious and brutal. The judge said Holly had knife injuries that were inflicted with severe force to her jaw, skull, backbone, and shoulder during the murder." Justice Hilliard added, Stabbing her head in that way was a terrible thing to do. Holly's mother was stopped from seeing her in the alley and ambulance because of the horrifying condition she was in. The force you used was so great that the knife broke and the blade was bent out of shape. The pathologist said seeing a knife so damaged was incredibly rare. I am sure you intended to kill her, and you knew how final death was. The judge said it is likely MacPhail had the knife with him that day to scare Holly by harming himself, and formed the intention to attack her when it became clear their relationship would not be resumed just before the killing. Justice Hilliard added, "She was entitled to break off the relationship if she wanted to, and spend time with whoever else she chose." Towards the end of his sentencing remarks, Mr. Justice Hilliard says he takes account of the fact the relationship with Holly was especially important to MacPhail against the background of his chaotic home life. Your speech impediment affected your ability to establish relationships and friendships with others, and so you set particular store by your relationship with her. The judge says, adding, "This made its ending all the more difficult for you to process and work through." He says MacPhail has also expressed remorse, yet still sought to blame Holly in some way. "It was clear in your evidence to the jury that you have persuaded yourself that Holly had treated you badly," the judge tells MacPhail, adding, "Your first reaction at the scene was to say that she had been horrible to you, and I think that this belief tempers or reduces somewhat the amount of remorse you feel." Before the verdict was announced, Holly's mother gave a heartbreaking statement in which she recounted the day she learned of what happened to Holly.
On Friday, the 27th of January, 2023, our lives changed forever. I kissed my 4 kids goodbye on their way to school, and one never came home. How can any parent begin to comprehend receiving a phone call from a stranger, telling them that their daughter had been stabbed? Those words still play on repeat through my head as we raced to the scene with 2 of my kids in the car crying, frightened at what was unfolding. I could never have imagined what we would see. The worst things were running through our heads, but I never imagined how horrific the reality of the scene would be. The absolute trauma on my children's faces as they watched their sister being placed into an ambulance is something that will stay with them for the rest of their lives, and the full enormity of the situation cannot be put into words. I will never be able to erase from my mind that I was stopped from seeing my daughter in that alleyway or ambulance, seeing her eyes open or hearing her last words, her knowing that her mum was by her side. I couldn't even hug or touch her in hospital. My daughter was a crime scene. She was evidence. For me, this is a classic case of domestic abuse. The law states that I'm not allowed to call it that because of Holly's age, but I firmly believe that Logan thought if he couldn't have Holly, then no one could. He was obsessed with her. Holly's case has been labelled as knife crime, but making sure that people know the truth about her case is one of my goals. I firmly believe that teenagers should be taught about healthy relationships in schools and domestic abuse services offered at a younger age. Maybe then Holly would have recognised the red flags earlier and had access to other services that could have helped her. I don't want Holly to become another statistic. There is so much media coverage of how many women are killed each year by men. It almost normalises it for young men like Logan. Things have got to change.
MacPhail had admitted manslaughter but was convicted of murder as well as wounding with intent on the teenage boy. At trial, he said he wanted to return some of Holly's things, slippers, clothes, and teddy bears, but when he was arrested, he didn't have any of it with him. MacPhail was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 17 years and a further 5 years in prison for intentionally wounding another young man who tried to stop the attack. MacPhail was told even after he has served the minimum term, he will only be released when safe to do so. Speaking after the sentencing, Detective Darren Davies of Northumbria Police said it was a truly devastating case, with Holly's future cruelly taken away by MacPhail. Of course, nothing will ever reverse the tragic events of that evening, Detective Davies said, adding, "But I hope the result today will bring her loved ones a sense of closure so they can attempt to move forward." So many lives have been changed forever by the decisions he made that night, and now he will have plenty of time to think about that in his cell. We would urge everyone to look at the pain this incident has caused to so many people and think twice before carrying a weapon of any kind.